started. Oh, we are getting started with today's training. You are here because you are a new field instructor for the Field Education Collaborative, or perhaps you are someone who has been with us for a while and just wanted to get a refresher on the information. So I am so excited to have you all here today. My name is Dr. Wendy Ducasse. I am the Director of Field Education and Assistant Clinical Professor for St. Louis University School of Social Work. And on behalf of the Field Education Collaborative, I'd like to welcome you all for being here today. We could not do this work without you. You are a critical piece of orienting students to the profession of social work and providing education. So thank you so much for being here. And going to someone, please make.
And I'll send you the discharge summary also.
You're muted, Wendy.
How did I get muted? I shouldn't be muted, but that's one thing. Please, if you are in a space where there is noise in your environment, please do mute yourselves to minimize distractions. I will share my screen now and go ahead and get us started. Okay. So, as I mentioned, I'm Dr. Wendy Ducasse, the Director of Field Education and Assistant Clinical Professor for St. Louis University's School of Social Work. And I would like to welcome you all here for our training today. And I will also ask my colleagues to introduce themselves as well. As you see on the screen, the collaborative is comprised of Fontbonne University, St. Louis University, the University of Missouri, St. Louis, and the Brown School at Washington University in St. Louis. So I would like my colleagues who are here present to introduce themselves to you as well. So you'll have some names and faces to go together for that. If you could unmute yourselves and introduce yourselves, that'd be great.
Hi, my name is Libby Lyons, and I'm the Director of Field Education at Fontbonne University. Welcome, everyone.
Hi, I'm Patty Rosenthal, and I am also the Director of Field Education, but I am at UMSL, and I am the Associate Dean as well. And welcome all of you. Glad you're all here.
Hello, my name is Jewel Stafford. I am also a Director of Field Education, and I am also an Assistant Dean at the Brown School at Washington University. Welcome, everyone.
Great, thank you, colleagues. I want to start with a couple of reminders. If you are here for training you are all here for training, make sure that your screen name is updated to the name that you utilized when you signed up for training, as well as that name that you have on your request for your CEs if you are requesting those in the future. So I want to give you an idea of what to expect today. We've done the introductions of who is a part of the collaborative, and I want to talk to you a little bit about what it is that you will learn today. We will talk through what it means to be a field instructor. We'll talk about how to support the students that you'll receive. We'll talk through the learning agreement, and we'll talk about things that may be important for you to know in terms of what students in hindsight reflect on as things that would have been helpful for them in their experience, as well as that of field instructors. We will have a panel near the end of current field instructors, as well as a student perspective, to give you some ideas of some things to consider as you are onboarding your first student. Or if you are a returning field instructor who's doing this as a refresher, this will be information for you to consider as you continue that partnership and relationship. Something for you to know is by attending today's session, you will be eligible to receive students as a field instructor. These trainings are a part of a 6-session series, and I will show you the others that you will be able to participate in so that you know what is coming. And also know that you can do these additional trainings at your leisure. Ideally, they're completed over the next 2 years, but we recognize that with schedules and things, sometimes that is not possible. So to get to this, and someone on the team, please put this in the chat, you would go to fieldedu.com. And it shows you the next sessions that are offered during this academic year. And so the sessions that you're in today are session 1 and 2, Introduction to Field Instruction and Successful Beginnings. The next ones in the series are sessions 3, 4, 5, and 6, and these are the topics. You can register through the links that are attached here. You do not need to take them in sequence order. You can take them out of order. So maybe your schedule allows for you to take session 6, and then you might need to go back at another point to take the others, but these are the ones that are available. And you also will see that there is Field Instructor Appreciation Day, which will be in March. I believe Libby will touch on that a little bit later on in terms of the date, and we will send out invites for all of you to participate in that as well. I'm going to switch my screen back to the presentation. All right. So, and just informally, give me an idea of who we have in the space today. I know that and you can type this in the chat, I know that we have folks from schools, mental health agencies, folks who work in gerontology, hospitals, the VA. But what might be some other spaces that you are representing? Case management. Where else are people from? Okay, Children's Division, youth serving organizations, emergency shelter. Great, great. Okay. DMH, inpatient psychiatry. Okay. Okay. And so it's great to have a variety of perspectives here. And as you are in smaller breakouts, which we'll have a little bit later, you'll be able to offer each other some experiences and talk about how things work in your space, and recognizing that as you're developing your learning agreements and working with your students, some of the tasks that they will work on and that you will talk through with them may look different simply because of the scope of practice and the tasks that the work that you do, whether it be direct service with client populations or more macro work and advocacy. So let's talk about field education. As you all are here to be field instructors, you should know, and if you don't know this already, I will be the first to give you this exclusive information. Field education is the signature pedagogy of social work education. And this is the way that we introduce our students to the profession of social work. Going out and doing practica is a way for them to apply what they've learned in classes to actual work of working with clients, whatever your client populations are. This is how we connect with you. This is how colleges and universities learn about what are the pressing issues in our communities. What are the areas in which we need more information in our curriculum to inform students and ensuring that they have the knowledge that they need as they prep to go out to do work with you and eventually post-graduation. And it also unites that, as I mentioned, it unites that learning and service piece. So we go from the theoretical and learning to the actual doing. And it is an important and integral piece of what we do. And it is also how we vet students' readiness to go into the work of social work. You must successfully complete your practica experiences in order to successfully matriculate into the profession of social work. I'm going to talk through an overview of the roles. The majority of you here are going to be in the role of field instructor. Some of you may be in the role of task instructor. And then I'll also talk about student responsibilities, the role of the faculty liaison, as well as the offices of field education at our institutions of learning. So your role is that of a supervisor, mentor, role model, and instructor. You are very much tasked with showing students how to do social work. You're guiding them and you're counseling them and you're showing them the work of social work and how they do what they do. You are leading them by that strong example that you will exhibit as a professional, and you will be in charge of facilitating that learning and professional development. All those things that a student needs to know to be oriented to being a social worker at your agency, you will ensure that they have the knowledge base to do all those things. And you're mentoring, you're guiding them through their process and knowing that there is a lot that they don't know. And so it will come up. And so part of your work will be advising and guiding them and encouraging them during that, because so many times students will say, well, what if I mess up? What if I don't know what I'm doing? This is where you learn that. And this is where you get the practice. And a large part of your role will be encouraging and guiding them and helping them through the thought process of what to do when I get stuck. Because I'm sure we can all think of times as social workers where we got stuck, when we had a client situation, or we were trying to figure out resources, or there was something going on and we didn't know how to articulate it clearly in a policy brief or something. We can all remember that time. And as mentors, and as we can reflect on that practice wisdom, it's an opportunity for us to help to guide them through those feelings of anxiety. So you're providing that information that they need. You're discussing appropriate professional behavior. You're talking them through, when we are in this space, maybe you go to court. These are the types of things that we wear. This is cultural etiquette within the space that we work. And then also recognizing, and this is a key point that I want you to be thoughtful of, is to make sure that we're flexible and responsive to our students' needs and stages of development. Because some students will come to you at different levels of learning. Maybe they have previous experiences in social service capacity. Maybe they haven't been a social worker, but they have some experience. So you, like we do with our clients, meet them where they are in their area of their areas of learning, and adjusting your instruction accordingly. Recognizing that some of your students will be farther along than others. For some people, this may be their first job, and this may be their first job in this capacity and working with people in the social work arena. So keeping that in mind will be important to the success as well. And you'll want to give balanced feedback, and Patty will talk about this a little bit later, but being thoughtful of giving both recognizing those things that they're doing well as those continued growth points, and just making sure that we do think about their learning style and your instructional style, as well as honoring and being thoughtful and respectful in the conversations and how you deliver that information. And task instructors do some of the same things. The difference in being a task instructor and a field instructor is that our task instructors are folks who may not have social work degrees, or they may be folks who have their MSW but don't quite have the years of experience that are required to be a field instructor yet. And many of you who are in larger organizations may utilize task instructors because you are a massive organization. And so that task instructor might be that person who is in charge of the day-to-day supervision, and they might be the person that the student checks in with, and they work directly with them on whatever projects or tasks that your organization is requiring of them. And then that field instructor is a person who provides that weekly supervision. Students are required to have a minimum of 1 hour individual supervision with their field instructor. Task instructors can, be a part of those things, but really they do need that one-on-one time with that field instructor to unpack any things that may be arising during their time and working with clients, or any questions, and to get that supervision in talking through any kinds of social work concepts or issues that may arise during their experience. So let's talk about the student. The student is responsible for securing their practicum. It is a self-selection process, and we use that model across the collaborative. And what that means is we have a database of agencies that students can choose from and kind of look at that may align with their areas of interest. And so they are responsible for reaching out to your organizations and setting up interviews and talking with you about the organizations to get an idea of if this is a place that they want to go to for learning. And of course, it is a mutual selection. You have to be interested in the student and see that their interests align with what it is that you're able to provide. And so once that happens, that practicum is secured along with some other paperwork that happens on the back end of things at our universities. Also, they're responsible for completing and submitting the learning agreement, which we'll talk about what is included in that learning agreement a little bit later. And while you will work with them to develop that learning agreement, their responsibility is to submit that. And the onus for learning is on the student. They should be actively participating in all things within your agency that are opportunities for them to learn. Asking questions, sitting in on meetings, observing, depending on what it is that you do, whether eventually perhaps they'll have their own caseload or clients that they'll work with, or they'll have some more independent tasks once they are onboarded and you have a vision or you are able to see what their readiness is. They provide feedback. They are responsible for completing all their paperwork and meet those due dates and deadlines, and practicing and exercising self-care. And as field instructors and task instructors, you modeling what self-care looks like will be very important to them as well, because that may not be something that they are used to doing. And so we want to step beyond saying, make sure you take care of yourself, but actually modeling and showing them what it looks like to do that. Stepping away from our desk to eat lunch, as some of us are munching during this training. But getting up away from your screen, walking around, all those kinds of things so they can see you doing it, not just talking about it in supervision. That is all an important part of the student responsibility, but it's also very helpful for you to model that as well. So let's talk about the faculty liaison / advisor. And that person is the individual from the university who will reach out to you within the first week or so of your student coming on site and introducing themselves and saying, hi, I am the faculty liaison, and I will be working with you and student X. They are a faculty member at the institution that your student comes from, and they are the people who will work with you if there are any questions or concerns, if there are site visits that they need to schedule with you to check in and see how things are going and where things stand with their learning agreements. And if any things arise throughout your time when working with a student on site, they are your first point of contact. And so be on the lookout for that email with their contact information, introducing themselves pretty soon at the beginning of the semester. And so the offices of field education at our 4 universities provide that infrastructure for practicum. We manage their documentation. We approve sites. We approve you. You probably received an email from me once you had submitted your application, kind of guiding you through the next steps of things. We are also responsible for supporting our faculty liaisons. If there are any concerns that are more broad issues that we need to talk about and talk through and support you and the liaison and the student through, then we do engage in those conversations as well. And we also train you. We train all the folks to make sure that you have a good understanding and foundational knowledge of what it is to be a field instructor and what's included in all of that. So let's talk a little bit about what is included. So you get your student, right? You've talked with your student and you've decided this is going to be student X's start date. What we know from experience and what we know from research, whether it is research and successful beginnings for practicum students or just successful beginnings for employment, we know that there are some really important things that are integral to ensuring or increasing the likelihood of that success. And they're bulleted here on the screen. Who's the contact person? Will that be you? Will that be someone else? So if you're the field instructor, will the task instructor be the person who is the contact? How does that work? Has that information been communicated to your student? Website information. Do you have I believe in 2024 you have a website, but if you do they have access to that so that they can get a full picture of the gamut of everything that is offered in terms of services through your organizations? What is the atmosphere like? What is the culture of your organization? How are things run there? Are you formal? Are you relaxed? Are you informal? Do people go by title? Are you Dr. so and so? Is it first name? Is it Mr. Mix, Mr. or Mrs. or whomever, whatever your salutation is, and last name? How does that go? Those are the kinds of, that's some other information that your students would need to know. And ideally, you have met with your student prior to this. So, with them having a tour, them having an understanding of all the things that are included, so that they can familiarize themselves with this space, as well as with what the routine will be like once they get started. We also want to think about real responsibilities and diverse responsibilities within the context of their practicum experience. When you talk a little bit later on about the competencies and the areas of learning, that will give you an idea of what I'm talking about. So when you look at the responsibilities within those areas or examples of tasks that can be completed, I want you to be looking at this through the lens of what are some, quote, real social work tasks that this student can complete that will demonstrate their competency in this area. And recognizing also that there may be some things because of legalities or because of their pace of learning that they may not get to in the very beginning, or there may be some things that your agency policies don't allow for them to be able to do. But we want to get depth and breadth of experience within organizations so that they can really have a full, solid, and rich opportunity in working with you in your organizations. So things within maybe your department and other departments, opportunities to shadow in those departments so that they can see how all the pieces go together within your organization. While you might work within one department, if there are opportunities for them to experience other spaces, that would be great as well, to have some exposure to what else goes on within your organization. And then also think about who is the backup to you. If you have an emergency, if you're sick, if there is some reason that you are not going to be available to work with that student that particular day, who's the backup person? Who should they reach out to if they have questions? Who should they report to if you happen to be out on any given day? And we also want to recognize and acknowledge student contributions. So if they are working on a project, if they are helping to write up newsletters, if they are doing research for a policy brief, or if they are looking in Razor's Edge on donors, for prospective donors, recognize those contributions, in your intra-agency newsletters, any staff meetings that you have, any opportunities that you can publicize the good works that they are doing as students. It's really helpful, and students appreciate that recognition. And if there are things that they're doing that are just awesome, if you could also send those to the faculty liaison so that we can publicize those within our universities as well. We love knowing all the great work that students are doing, because sometimes they don't tell us. They're really, really humble. And so we have to find out from other people that they have helped to do research to secure this grant. I'm like, what do you mean you helped to secure a multi-million-dollar grant? They're like, oh, it's no big deal. I'm like, it is a big deal. So any opportunities to publicize that information, please send those back to us, and we would love to be able to do that. And also think about what the orientation process is going to be like for your organization. Are you going to have them go through orientation like they're a new employee? I know some organizations do that because that allows for them to see all of the workings of your organization and get the background of the philosophical components of why the organization does what it does, what the mission is about, and all the people who come together to ensure that successful onboarding happens for employees. You may find that helpful for your students. That may not be something that works for your organization, but if it does and it's a possibility, then then do that. If that's not something that you can do, think about what you might include in an orientation packet, an orientation to your organization or to your department, or just getting onboarded. Where are the restrooms? Where should you park? Where do people eat lunch? Is there a cafeteria? And if there is a cafeteria, do you need to have a badge? Can you charge things? Do you need cash? Or if there's not that type of setup, where can they put their lunch? Is there a certain refrigerator? Are there certain restrooms that folks need to use? All those kinds of things are really, really helpful in knowing what to do on those first days, as well as dress, and thinking about what it is, are you, again, as I mentioned earlier, in terms of the atmosphere, are you a casual environment? Can folks wear jeans? Can you only wear jeans on Friday if you have an agency shirt on? When you go to court, what's expected? All of that is really important and integral so that students know what to expect when they come on. And one thing that came up during our preparation for this workshop, we were talking in our planning, and one of my colleagues mentioned the use of AI, artificial intelligence. And that's not something that we'd ever thought about before, but it is timely that we do think about that. And so as you are supporting the successful beginning of your student, I want you to think about what are your agency's rules around the use of artificial intelligence. Because what we've learned is that there are folks that are using AI to generate things like case notes and write up different documents. And so you want to think about that. Is that something that is in policy in your agency? If there's not a policy, a formal written down policy around that, what is your stance on that? And if there is a stance, well, actually, let me walk that back. You need to have a stance around the use of AI. And you need to articulate it clearly to your practicum students. So it is not acceptable, or you can use it in these ways, or you cannot use it. That needs to be explicitly stated. And you want to think about, again, you want to talk to them about your expectations. You want to walk them through any agency policies, and also have some really strong conversation around the ethics surrounding that. And just as a quick plug, and I know we'll talk about different continuing education sessions that will be offered a little bit later on for things that may be areas of interest. St. Louis University is offering a session related to this, related to the use of AI in clinical work, the ethics surrounding that, and it will also meet the CE requirement for the state of Missouri around ethics. So if that's something that you're interested in, we will have information a little bit later on about that. But I just wanted to get you thinking about that, because as we continue to see AI, artificial intelligence, being used in a number of ways, we are seeing it also creep into the social work space. So we want to think about that as clinicians, as social workers, as mentors, how we want to foster conversation and professional growth and development around that area, and being particularly intentional in our instruction and guidance and mentoring around that. But I will wrap this by saying I very much hope that you have thought about your agency structures that will support the successful beginnings, not just the beginnings, but the entirety of the student's experience there. And if you've not thought about them, that you see this slide, and think about what it is that you will be implementing and doing to ensure that successful beginning and continued process from start to finish. And with that, I will turn it over to my colleague, Patty Rosenthal. I'm going to stop sharing my screen.
Hi, everybody. It's actually Jewel who is going to talk next. But I'm glad you actually turned it over to me, Wendy, because there was a question in the chat, and I think it's a good time to talk about that. The question was, are the additional sessions that Wendy referred to required? And they are. You have a 2-year period to complete them, so you need to complete today's sessions to host a student. But then you have 2 years to complete the subsequent sessions. And as Wendy said, you can do those in any order. The next one is actually coming up in February. It's session 5, teacher, mentor, supervisor. As Wendy mentioned, all the information is on the website. So that's one thing that was in the chat and I responded to, but I didn't know if you were all following the chat. Another one was, does this training meet the requirement for clinical supervision? So people that are postgraduate and they want to be clinical supervisors, and it does not. So I just want to clarify that. It is actually something we looked at. It came up a number of years ago, and we thought, wouldn't that be great? We could do this for our field instructors, provide training for both. But given what the state requires in terms of the content for the licensure supervision, it really was not a good fit, because our emphasis is really more on students and education and mentoring, and not so much on the kinds of supervision that is required by the state. So anyway, with that, I will turn it over to our colleague, Jewel.
Hello, everyone. I wasn't sure if we wanted to do a quick activity around the qualities of a task supervisor or lessons that people learn. So I am going to just put that in the chat and see if we wanted to just take a moment to hear a little bit from you. I'm gonna share my screen. I'm gonna put something in the chat and we're gonna boogie. So, given all that you heard, and I'm not sure if you can see my screen, you would think I've never done this before. Okay, can everyone see my screen? Yes. What were the qualities of your field instructor or your mentor that you admired or least admired? You can put that in the chat or you can come off screen. I'll tell you what I admired about my field instructor before we break out. I admired when I was a student and I was, we're talking like caveman times. When I was a student and I had my field instructor, that we had weekly supervision, so I could know exactly what were the things that were important to me. So it looks like we have some really good things in the chat. It looks like hit the ground running, gentle, constructive criticism. Nice. So you learned without being discouraged or feeling like a failure. Excellent. It looks like we also have that they were available, least admired, not directly tied to the agency. Ooh, I got that. Yeah, excellent. Excellent. Patience and encouragement, very supportive. Okay. I love these. These are really, really important. Thank you for sharing them in the chat. Please keep them coming. Excellent. And then what were some lessons that you remember learning? If you can remember to your time as a student, what were some of those really important lessons that you learned as a student? Don't be so hard on yourself. Ooh, what a good one. Yeah. Not to take things personally, ask questions. These are excellent. And the reason why we're asking you these questions is because we really want you to consider what kind of advice you'll be giving as not just a field instructor, but as a mentor to our students. Yes, I love this. And so what I think as we start this beautiful chat waterfall, as they call it, is that you all can get a sense of some of the information that other field instructors are sharing with their students. And you can also use that as your own tool and your own resource for maybe some advice, maybe some parameters, maybe some opportunities to have conversations with your students in a really intentional way. Yes, self-care, be patient with ourselves. Grace is so important. So thank you for this. This is really, really, this is awesome. Okay, excellent, excellent. So please keep populating your chats. This is excellent, awesome. I'm hoping everyone can see my screen because I'm going to move on to, thank you, Patty. All right, so we are all here and many of us are social workers, but for those of us who are not, we're going to get into a little bit about what are our social work competencies. So when we start thinking about the ways in which we are engaging in the knowledge, the skills, the behaviors, the opportunities for learning. The social work competencies are those standards that were developed by our Council for Social Work Education. We affectionately call them CSWE. They provide our certificate of accreditation to social work schools to make sure that we know how our students are engaging in their learning and in their learning outcomes. So these competencies are there to help define the profession of the social worker, and they help us to know definitively what a social worker is. And not just what they are, but the qualities, the knowledge, the values, the behaviors that we incorporate in our work. So here are the 9 competencies that you will be working with your social workers on, your students on. And so we have 9 altogether. The first 5, as you can see over here on the right, maybe on your left, on my right, but these first 5 over here are really helping to describe the profession as a whole, right? So what are the ethical and professional behaviors? How are you engaging with clients through the lens of diversity and practice? How are you advancing social, economic, and environmental justice? How are you thinking about evidence-based practice and practice-informed research? And how are you engaging in policy? So those are some parameters around the profession. 6 to 9 are really sort of the foundational generalist practice activities that we want to make sure each and every student works within their practicum setting. So whether you're working in a micro setting, whether you're working in a macro setting, or whether you're working in a meso setting, these are the activities we want you to think about. For those of you who aren't social workers, if you're working with individuals, families, and groups, we think of those as our micro. If you're working in organizations, those are more of our meso. And if you're working in more of our policy and community-based settings, then those are more of our macro. But CSWE wants to make sure that students have the ability to integrate and apply social work knowledge, values, and skills in a variety of practice settings through purposeful, intentional, and professional lenses to promote and build up our community well-being. So these are the things you're going to see over and over and over and over again. And so where will you see them, you ask? Well, you'll see them on the Educational Learning Agreement. This is where you start constructing what we call either the independent study. Some people like to refer to them as a social contract. Some people like to refer to it as a guideline, but your educational learning plan is what you and your student will mutually agree upon as the roles, the responsibilities, the tasks, the activities that you will be engaging in throughout that practicum experience. So again, It's a learning contract. It is a competency-based document. So again, we're looking at competency-based education and really trying to determine how your students are embedding these knowledge, the knowledge, the value, the practice, the skills, and the behaviors of a professional social worker in your organization. The great part about having the educational learning agreement is that it can also serve as a job description, right? And so we always ask our students to think about the educational learning agreement as a parallel process to the things they want to see on their resume. So what are 2 or 3 things you want to add on your resume? Perfect. Make sure you put that in your educational learning agreement. And we also ask our students to integrate what they're learning in their classrooms into the practicum settings. So if they have assignments or if there are huge projects, we also want them to share their syllabus with you, so then you can also integrate that into the educational learning agreement. So why a narrative ELA? Well, before we used to have check boxes, but we realized that the field is so dynamic that you just can't check a box, right? And each community is unique. Each of our patients are unique. The work that we do is dynamic and unique. So we want students to articulate and operationalize what they're doing as it relates to those 9 competencies. It also creates sort of a roadmap for what the student and the field instructor are doing. So think about when you are going to a new state or a new destination. Don't you want to get on your Google Maps or your Waze to help you figure out where you're going? Well, that's what the ELA does for the student. It helps them to figure out where they're going and how to get there in the practicum organization. It also supports an individualized and meaningful approach to the goals, the objectives, the tasks, and the activities they'll be doing as a part of their experiential learning in the organization. It's also a living and breathing document. So it will allow for them to think about what they're doing when they first get there, but then as they get more comfortable and they get more competent with their tasks, it facilitates a deeper exploration and helps them to identify additional practicum tasks. For those of you all who are engaged in strategic planning, this is right up your alley. This is their logic model. This is their Gantt chart. This is their strategic planning approach to how will I know what I'm doing? How will I describe what I'm doing? And how will I know if what I'm doing is meeting the mark? If I have measurable metrics, if I have indicators. The ELA comprises of all of those different opportunities to measure what they're doing in an effective way and in a time-bound approach. It also helps to prepare students for future interviews. So these are an opportunity for you to have deeper conversations with your students one-on-one in supervision to help them prepare for the next interview and say, all right, well, tell me about your challenges. Tell me about some of the things you'd like to accomplish. How are things going? Right? So these are really, really awesome approaches that you can take. So completing the ELA is a mutual responsibility. We tend to ask our students to start drafting just so you can get a sense of what students are thinking about and how students are forming a infrastructure or some thoughts around the task and responsibilities that they'll be doing. So we want to make sure that you all do this together because again, it is a mutual social and learning contract. The field instructor must approve the ELA before turning it into us. So we're going to ask the students to sign, we're going to ask you to sign so that we know exactly that both of you have agreed to this. Helpful documents to support this, again, as I said before, your syllabi, your job description, and many of us at our respective institutions, we have reference guides or ELA guides, but each of us are here to answer any questions you may have. So if there's an opportunity to say, I saw this educational learning agreement and it feels complex, complicated, unsure, please let us know. Libby, you raised your hand.
Yes, we had a question by one of the participants.
Yes.
It is not in the chat, but she had raised her hand. It was Mel Matthews. I don't know if you still have the question, Mel, and would like to ask it.
Hi, Mel.
Yeah. Hi. Oh, does it come up Mel Matthew on my screen? It should come up Melanie. Does it come up
Hi,
Melanie?
Melanie.
Or
It might
does
have.
look-
I might have just seen it as Mel.
No, but
I
that's
see
but
that
that,
as you all the time. So there it
no,
is.
but and you can call me Mel, but I know I wanted to make sure that it was coming up. But I think that the question was answered. But I one of the questions that I do have, and I'm not sure if the participants who have had students before have experienced this, where students will come and they absolutely have no idea how to approach this ELA. Is that a responsibility that is tasked for the field instructor to walk them through it, try to help them to navigate that? Or is that an expectation that placements ought to have, that students ought to have to come in with some knowledge of where to begin? Because I'm finding that sometimes the students absolutely have no idea sometimes what's expected of them. And if that's something that, so I wasn't quite sure. I know we go over it with them and kind of, let them know tasks and that sort of thing, but some will come in with absolutely no clue on how to start it. And so is that something that is an expectation for field instructors to help them navigate?
So Melanie, it's almost as though you were a plant. So yes, it is an expectation for you both, but here's what we can do. Each of us tend to have what we call educational learning guides. And what we do is we give you all examples of potential activities that you can select from if you don't want to start from scratch. So if this is your first student and and your student is also very new and you're both coming from that very new place, we have guides that can help to support providing some examples. The other thing that you can use is the interview, the flyer that you all initially had, right? So I'm sure at some point, somewhere, you all indicated that you wanted a student to accomplish certain tasks and responsibilities. And when you interviewed that student, you were talking about, well, what motivated you to be a part of this? What interested you in being a part of this organization? Those are also some of the things that you can start to put down. And 3, you can also, and I'm going to move this here. You can also think about some project descriptions. You can look at some of the students' ELA, the ELA guides that we have, but you can also ask them to incorporate some of the assignments that they have from their syllabus. So you can also ask them to bring in their syllabus and to do that as well. And if all 3 of those things, Melanie, do not work, let's just say you're like, we're spending way too much time on this. That's when you call me, Libby, Patty, or Wendy in, and we can, before the site visit, really work with you both to start that process. So think of us as your technical assistants, and you don't have to do anything alone. We are here to help you. That's part of what our job is, and we can help you to get started on that. And you're also going to sort of, what do they call that? You're going to help us. Your question actually helped us to set us up for one of our activities. So then we can work on that together in this training to get us started with an ELA. But that's a great question. Thank you so much for that.
Jewel, can I jump in? There was a question in the chat that we're answering for UMSL and SLU. Where do they find the guide for Brown School students? The ELA
I
guide that you
can,
referenced.
yeah, I can upload it when we are in the break. Yes.
And Jewel,
Great.
can I also say for SLU, if you have a SLU student and you're working with them to develop their learning agreement and you're stuck, start with their faculty liaison as a point of contact in suggested activities. If you're not able, if either of you are unable to think of through those things and figure out what's an actionable thing that would demonstrate competency in this area, start with them. And then if they're not able to support you, then of course I'm available. But for our flow, it makes more sense to start with them than for me.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Sure.
Excellent. So initially, to your point, that when we at the Brown School, whenever we are sending out our approval letters, we also include the reference ELA guide to make sure that you and your students can have a common language around how to complete the competencies. Partly the reason why we give an ELA guide is for two reasons. At the Brown School, we're using different competencies, and we also encourage every student to develop a racial equity project. So for us, it's really important that you use a reference guide because this may be the first time you're even thinking about racial equity, and our students may be new to that as well. So when at my earliest convenience, I will place that in the chat so you can have that as well. So thinking about the ELA as sort of your, again, just a job description to help develop focus and plan for learning. During the practicum, it's also a great opportunity as you're starting to get to know your student and they're starting to get more familiar with the organization to check in on their progress and update and revise as needed. And then at the conclusion of the practicum, evaluate that learning and use it as an opportunity to do practicum closure, right? Did we do what we said we were going to do? Is this a point of evaluation for us to say, did we meet all of the metrics? Did we think about all of the different pieces that we can accomplish? And at the conclusion of the practicum, it's also an opportunity for you to continue a conversation with your student about how you would like the relationship to continue, right? Because a lot of us in this field, we end up still working with our field instructors. We end up using them for reference. So at this conclusion stage, this is a great opportunity for you to tell your students how to continue to work with you, how to think about references, how to help them with their resume, and even to prepare for the next opportunity. So let's take example one. So thinking about what it means to demonstrate ethical and professional behavior as a social worker, what are two ethical dilemmas that we can talk about each month? That could be a standing activity that you put in your educational learning agreement. Reviewing the code of ethics could be a standing activity. Bringing in an article from the local, national, or federal news each month could be a standing activity. So those are just some of the ways in which you can identify some of your tasks or activities. And then the evaluation, how will you know it's working, is that you're reviewing these tasks and activities with your field instructor each week at your weekly supervision. So that's just one of the ways in which we help to frame some of our ethical behaviors. You may have in their tasks or activities about dress code, and Wendy talked a little bit about that. You may have conversations around your AI policies. You can put that in here as well, right? Because that also has ethics and professional behavior. Policy tends to be the one competency that tickles everybody like a cactus. So let's walk through this one. When we talk about policy, we're talking about little p policy that's in your organization as well as big P policy in terms of Jeff City or federal legislation. So here are just some examples. in terms of tasks and activities that you can engage in. They can be policies or laws that are impacting the agency's client population. So they can be health policies, they can be HIPAA policies, they can be talking about privacy and confidentiality, right? How are we thinking about those types of things? It could be around Medicare, Medicaid, but it can also be around current legislation that will impact how you work and serve with your particular clients and populations. So what are some of those things that students can wrap their heads around? And so these are just some examples of tasks and activities that you can work with your students on, but it can also be about parking policy or dress code policy, or if you're doing research, what are those research policies that you need to consider? And so in terms of evaluation, how are you reviewing these policies with your field instructor, again, at your weekly meeting, so that can be a weekly metric, or how are you presenting findings on legislation to agency staff and stakeholders? And then how are you differentiating between 6, 7, 8, and 9? So here are a couple of examples. How are you thinking about engaging with individuals, families, groups, organizations, and communities? We like to think about this as the beginning stage. How am I building trust? How am I building relationships? How am I first beginning to introduce myself to clients and the work that we'll be doing together, right? So this could be through intake, phone screenings, informed consent, rapport building. That's the engagement piece. The assessment piece is, how will I figure out what clients actually need, right? So are there scales that I'm using? Are there tools that I'm using? Am I doing stakeholder interviews? Am I going to town halls? How am I figuring out what is concerning my client or what brings them in today, right? So how am I thinking about assessing those needs? The intervention is, what will I then do, right? So what am I doing to address those needs or to provide resources or to provide assistance to the client? So am I meeting with them weekly? Am I doing health education, psychoeducation? Am I doing an intervention? In the treatment plan, are we going to find housing, right? What are we doing? What are some of those interventions and coordination of services or resources? Am I referring you to something or someone else? And then evaluation is, how will we measure how students actually achieved their goal? So is there an evaluation form? Is there a self-evaluation? How are we measuring that people have achieved what they said they were going to do? So that's how we think about engaging, assessing, intervening, and evaluating. And we're doing that in varied contexts. So we're doing that with individuals, we can do that with families, we can do that with groups, but we can also do that within organizations and communities. So to enjoy this, we're going to do what we would consider number 8. We're going to do something. And so for us, we are going to ask you all to get together in groups, and we're going to ask you to choose one competency out of all the 9 competencies, and you all are going to work together to develop a task and an evaluation for that competency. So what's a task or activity? And then how will you measure it? How will you know that you've achieved that task or you've achieved the goal for that activity? So I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I am going to see if there are any emerging questions. I know that was a lot, but this is like the most fun. I promise you, this is like really fun. It's like brainstorming with some of your colleagues. And this is also a great way for you all to meet each other and talk about how you all have addressed certain competencies. So for those of you who this is like your first time meeting each other, guess what? This is going to be a great opportunity to think through a lot of those competencies, knowledge, values, skills, and behaviors you want to work with your students on. So I think we're breaking out into groups. Are we breaking out into groups? Okay, we are breaking out into groups. I have to tell you, I'm an only child, so I speak a lot about what I'm going to do before I do it because I'm just used to talking to myself. So if you hear me talking to myself, it's because it's habit. So charge it to my head, not to my heart. Okay. Welcome back, everyone. At some point, I'll get used to the mute button. We hope that you all had an opportunity to work with each other to develop a competency and to develop a task and evaluation for that. We realize that we've had you on for a very long time, so we are going to give you a break. And so before we break, I'm going to give it over to Wendy so she can direct us before we break out.
Sure. Thanks, Jewel. So in the beginning, I talked about this a little bit about us being a collaborative. And as a result of you being trained by the collaborative, you as field instructors have the opportunity to serve as field instructors for students from any of the 4 universities represented here. And we recognize that perhaps when you filled out your application, you only selected one university because it was just one university student who was inquiring. So we want to give you the opportunity if you want to update that information, as well as perhaps when you register for this training, you didn't say, yes, I would like CEs for this. Jess is going to launch a quiz/poll for you to complete. If that does not pertain to you, if it's not applicable, you don't have to do it. But if you are someone who needs to update that information, please do complete that. We'll leave it up during your break and we'll close it at the end of the break. So Jess, if you could go ahead and launch that for us, that would be great. Oops. And we will see you back in 10 minutes.
Welcome back. I hope you had a great break. I hope you all are staying safe and warm. So now we're going to transition from the educational learning agreements to briefly just talking about who the learners are. And so many of us are learning in a way that we were taught based on our generational differences. And so what I wanted to just go over really quickly is just an overview of the working generations. And so I will make a self-disclosure. I am Generation X. I am part of that generation that felt like and still feels like I have to translate between baby boomers, millennials, and Gen Zs. Just as I get on Facebook, they're on to Twitter. Just as I get on Twitter, they're on to Snapchat. My students are on TikTok. Wherever I am, they're the next technology ahead of me. What's also important to know about this is that wherever we are, our clients may also be someplace else. So what this is really just giving us an overview of not just who we are and who our students are, but who are the clients and who, as Sesame Street always said, who are the people in our neighborhood, right? And so when I'm looking at this chart, I realize that some of our generations are probably used to using more technology, and some of our generations are used to using less technology. Why this is so helpful is depending on where your students are, and because we're social workers and we need to meet people where they are, this chart gives us just an indication of what is their dominant hand and comfort level. It means that for some of us, talking on the telephone and printing things out is a growth edge for us. And we just need to be aware of that. So when we are constructing our educational learning agreements, when we're using the DSM-4, when we're engaging in policy and procedures, that some of our students can give us an opportunity to share with us what their comfort level is. And it also gives us an opportunity to communicate with them why we continue to use the forms of communication that we do. So this is just an opportunity for us to recognize that sometimes we're operating in a language that maybe our students aren't used to. And this gives us a common language to work from. So I just wanted to share that as we're going to move into the stages of practicum, because that will become more and more apparent. So in the developmental stages of the student practicum, this is meant to go for a 2-semester practicum. But for some of us, it may be 1 semester. So if you only have a student for 1 semester, just know that this stage is condensed, and sometimes it doesn't happen in order. And so we're going to go a little bit through some of those stages just so you can get a sense of where the student is sitting when they're in those stages, and then what are the expectations for some of your responses or how to engage them and call them in to a different way of being. So the first stage is anticipation. You're super excited. You're excited to be there, but you might also have a little bit of anxiety about what the student's going to do, and they too have anxiety, right, about how they're going to perform. Disillusionment is when there is a breach in theory and practice. So what they thought they were going to do is not exactly what they're actually going to do. And so there's some of that breach in theory and practice. Confrontation is an opportunity for them to realign their expectations with a new approach to the educational learning agreement and to the expectations of the work they'll be doing. Competence, they're feeling the groove, they're in it, they know how to do it, and now you can give them more high-level tasks and they feel like they're a part of the organization. And culmination is where we bless and release. We say, thank you so much for being a part of our organization. We wish you well, and here's how you contact us. So we're going to go through these steps one at a time. So in the anticipation stage, again, students may be feeling some anxiety because a lot of our students, back to the generational stages that we were talking about, they are in it to get it right? So perfection may be where they're sitting. Sometimes our students aren't into the progress of things. They want to make sure they get it right. And for some of our students, if they're not going to do it perfectly, they're just not going to do it at all. And so how do we call them into the process that you're going to make mistakes? In fact, I hope you make mistakes because it shows that you're learning and you're growing in the field, right? So when they mess up, it's our job to give them some clear and specific goals to help assess what it is we expect for them to do at this level as a practicum student, and to really assess where they are in the process and scaffold their learning according to their needs. This may require us to do a more in-depth orientation and to maybe think about our orientation in terms of weekly components and maybe not all at once. Additionally, they're feeling vulnerable and self-conscious. Now, for some of us, vulnerability gives us an opportunity to know that we're learning something different, right? My grandfather used to tell me all the time, hey, You know, the only way you know that you're growing is when you feel uncomfortable. I've grown into that. I can manage ambiguity. But remember, this is new for some of our students. So what navigating ambiguity for you as a professional development behavior may feel like, to them may feel like this isn't the right thing for me. Maybe this isn't the right profession for me. Maybe I shouldn't even be there. So just normalize that this is part of the experience. This is a stepping stone, and this is what it means to work into this field. So disillusionment, this I think we've all been through, right? When we've had our first job, when we bought our first car, when we first got to grad school and we got our first exam back, right? Like, what was that feeling where you were like, this is not what I thought it would be? I'm having buyer's remorse. So there may be some frustration and anger. There may be some confusion. There may be, again, a lot of disappointment. So for us, our job is to, once again, normalize that this is a normal part of learning. That we want you to understand that what you thought you were going to do, there were maybe more steps to getting us to the desired outcome. And then help them to confront their fears. What is it that you're afraid of? What exactly is it that is driving a lot of this anxiety and discontent? Check in, clarify, and assess their expectations. This is also a great time to refer back to your educational learning agreement. And this is a good time to provide some constructive and critical feedback about the same way that you're feeling in this new space and not sure about what it is that you want to do. One, I have felt this way, but two, your clients might be feeling this way, right? And so how do we all continue to confront our fears to move to the place of learning and a place of growth? So this is some of the things that they're going to be thinking about over and over again. So the confrontation stage is where they're recommitting or they don't, right? So after we've had the discussion about the educational learning agreement, after we've revised what the tasks and activities are going to be, after we've reconsidered the role, sometimes it's okay to say this isn't for everyone and share with them how to know when to push through and persevere and when it might be an opportunity to say, you know, maybe this isn't the role for you at this organization. What else can we find for you to do? So that's also an opportunity. And again, in supervision, this gives us an opportunity to detect that and to identify those issues fairly quickly. If you are finding that the disillusionment phase is lasting longer than you're comfortable with, contact at SLU, the field liaison, and for us, contact any of us, just to give us a sense of how to call us into a conversation so that we can all three figure out what the next steps are. But we may just need some regular supervision, and this also allows us to think about dialogue as opposed to debate, right? So the thing that you're going to really hone on in the confrontation stage is the fact that the student is moving into taking more autonomy for their learning. So normally what happens in orientation is we set up our students really, really well, right? We give them the guide, we walk them through everything. We are helpful in pointing everything out to them. We have them observe us before. We give them draft case notes. They get to be observers. What I want to be clear about is the confrontation phase, the disillusionment phase comes on when we take those training wheels off, right? When we say, okay, hop in, you drive. Then they're like, yeah, right? That's normal. So just keep that in the back of your mind that sometimes the way that we're moving into the orientation phase, when we take off those training wheels and we're allowing students to ride the bike and steer for themselves, it is going to feel a little uncomfortable. And the natural response is, I don't want to ride the bike anymore. I want to get off. I'm afraid that I'm going to fall. The confrontation stage is where we're asking them to take responsibility for their learning and to share with us what's going to be helpful. The confidence stage is where they feel like they can not only ride the bike, right? For those of you who remember the riding bike analogy, but now you can ride with one hand. Now you can stand up and ride the bike, right? So your confidence stage is you get a clear sense of purpose. You are high accomplishments. You are invested in the work. You're asking complex questions. You are pulling in your assignments now because you can honestly see the gap. You couldn't see it before, but now you can see alignment between what you are doing in your classes and what you're now doing in the organization. So now you can take your policy assignments. You can take your organizational assignments, and now they're having different conversations with you, and they are actually initiating the conversations. So that's the confidence stage. So they're invested, they have we versus they conversation. Our job is to affirm and validate, to increase the complexity of the assignments, to assist them in developing really good coping strategies, time management, and prioritize what it is that they need. And then we also want to endorse them as part of the team and give them some agenda items to run in the meeting. And again, this is also where we're going to see increased theory to practice. The culmination stage is something to think about also in orientation, which is how do we begin with the end in mind? So for the students, this is where they're going to see sort of the elephant in the room. So how do I start this parallel process of doing my work well, knowing that there's an endpoint, and to remind not only my clients, the individuals, families, and groups that I'm working with, but to be incremental and staging that we will be coming to an end soon. So this is case management, this is termination with clients, and this is also where they get a little nervous about next steps. What will this mean for me? What will this mean for us? Now that we've started to develop this really good working relationship, now it's coming to an end. What does that mean? So this is an opportunity for you to be clear about what it means. Do you want to be their mentor? Do you want to write them a reference letter? And if you don't, field instructors, it's okay to say that. It's okay to say, I probably won't be your mentor, and here's why. I probably won't be able to write you a reference letter, and here's why, right? It's also reminding yourself that some of our students will be our colleagues in 1 or 2 years. And so we just want to be honest with them about where they are, what they've accomplished, and what to do next. And then finally, we have the termination process. This is also where a lot of our field documentation comes into play. This is where you get to see how the student starts to see themselves and the work that they've accomplished. But it also gets you to prepare for endings and some practicum review. This is also a great place for feedback. So here are some things that you've done well. Here are some things I see as an opportunity for growth. Here are some things I'd really love to see you work on. And if I'm your mentor, I'd love to work on those things with you. Final evaluation is where you get to share your evaluation of their performance, as well as provide a grade. And then this is also where they get to terminate with clients and the agency. So those are the stages. And I am going to see if there are any questions. If not, I'm going to pass it on to my dear colleague.
And I think I should unmute. Are there any questions? You can unmute yourselves and ask, or put them in the chat before we move on. All right. I am going to, give me a minute. I'm the baby boomer. So when we're talking about technology and all those things, I may be the one who needs a minute. I do. I thought I had it pulled up. All right. What is happening here?
If you want me to, Patty, I can always share.
Yeah, but then you have to advance, right?
For you, I'm willing to do it.
All right. Yeah, I don't know why it's not coming back up. Let me see what's going on here. Yeah, why don't you do that, Joel? Do you mind?
I don't.
Okay. I mean, I taught on Zoom. I've done this a million times. I can't figure out why I'm having an issue here.
Oh, it looks like we're viewing your screen with the run of show.
Mine?
Yeah.
Your patience. This is, yeah, that's my biggest challenge. I'm never nervous about talking. It's all the technology piece. Anyway, welcome everybody. I know this is a really long afternoon. So we appreciate you being here. After I finish my portion, we'll also be taking yet another break so everybody can get up and have a chance to move around. So Jewel talked about the stages that students experience in practicum. So we're going to there's going to be some overlap with what Jewel talked about, but we're going to look at it more from the field instructor perspective and talk about how to use that supervision time. And that's going to change a little bit as students move through different stages in practicum. So this is where the overlap is with what Jewel presented. So the first big bullet point I have on here is please honor your commitment to meet with students weekly. So why is that so important? Well, it's an accreditation requirement. So, from the school's perspective, that's really important. But more importantly, students really need your support. They are, beginning a new experience. And when students are unhappy at practicum, at least 50% of the time it's because their supervisor is not meeting with them regularly. And I know this from, 25 years of experience doing this. So it's really important that if you decide to host a student, that you think ahead of time about, do I have time to take on this commitment right now? What's happening in my life? What's happening in the life of my organization? Can I devote that time to that student? Because they really do need and want that time with you. The other reason why that hour of supervision is so important is because it's a time when you can have intentional conversations. So, you want to do the update on the projects and what's happening with the client, but it's also the time to have intentional conversations. And we'll get to that in a couple of minutes. But those are the things that don't happen sort of in that drive-by supervision, right? The student pops into your office. What do I do about this? You talk to them about what to do about whatever that thing is. But it's not a time to have intentional conversations. So that's why setting that hour aside is really important. You can use whatever format is comfortable for you, which is, you can ask the student to send you an agenda. You can brainstorm an agenda together at the beginning of your meeting so that all the items get covered. Whatever is comfortable and works for you and your student is fine, but I would encourage you to have some type of an agenda at the beginning of the meeting so that you know what it is that you're going to be talking about. Please schedule in advance. It's most helpful if you can do a regular supervision time every week. We'll meet every Tuesday at 2:00. And then when things come up, I've worked in agencies, I know that things happen. And then if you can't honor that time, then you reschedule with your student. But to have a standing time is helpful. And to the extent that you can, try to allow for privacy. And privacy means not just being in a private office, but limiting phone calls, texts, all those things that can be a distraction. And students have talked about that with my field instructor. We just get into something and they have to take a call. Now, again, we know in the work world, sometimes that's inevitable, but, to the extent that you can, if you can just really honor that hour with your student, that is really helpful. So how do you use supervision time? Well, again, there'll be some overlap and it's intentional because we're trying to really leave you with what's important to remember today. But in the beginning, you're going to orient your student to the organization, and Wendy talked a lot about that. You will develop the ELA. Well, you've talked about that already a lot, right? And again, that's a reciprocal process. So, our students, at least UMSL, and I think the other organizations as well, or the other universities, I actually sit down and I meet with students. We have planning meetings prior to practicum. What are the requirements? How do you find your practicum? What do you do in an interview? And then we get to the next stage, which is how do you complete that ELA? And at least for me, I spend an hour or over an hour talking with students about how to complete that ELA. So they should have some clue. If they come in and just say, I don't know what to do, if they're an UMSL student, I really want to know that because they should know what to do. Now, what you bring is your expertise about your organization. They don't know what your day-to-day operations look like. So it really should be a collaborative process. The next is building a relationship. That's so important. And it's important when you look at the literature on practicum and student satisfaction with their practicum, students who have a good relationship with their supervisor tend to be happier in their practicum, but they also tend to have better learning outcomes. So building a relationship is really key, just as you would, do engaging with clients in any kind of client work, whether your client's an individual, a family, constituents in a community. You want to pay attention to relationship building. And then talking about learning styles and teaching styles. So the next session that will be offered in February, I'm one of the facilitators for that. We do a learning inventory with you so that you can get a sense of your learning style. I do those, and I think some of the other universities do too with our foundation students, so that, Jill's nodding her head, so that students, when you have those initial sessions, you can talk about that with your student. How do you like to learn? This is how I like to learn. And then to the extent possible, you may want to do some adaptations in your teaching style to your students' learning style, especially initially when everything is new to them. So that's a really good conversation to have. If you haven't done the learning inventory yet, you can just say to the student, how do you like to learn? Do you do better talking things through? Do you do better trying things and coming back and talking about them? Do you want to read about this first? Do you want to see this first? So really just talking about those learning styles. And again, we will talk about this in a lot more depth in session 5. So, and that is coming up if anybody's interested. I'm not really doing a commercial for it, but I kind of am. Okay, so it'll be just, again, it's in February and the registration information is on the collaborative website. So at this stage, students typically, and every student is different, but generally students like to have more specific direction at this time. They want you to be a little bit more hands-on in the early stages, and they like opportunities to shadow, opportunities to observe. Now, again, every student is different. You may get that student who wants to dive right in, and you have to kind of back them up a little bit and say, well, you don't know everything there is to know, and you need to kind of watch this first. You'll get those exceptions for sure, but by and large, students in the beginning really like the opportunity to shadow and observe. Now, if they're still wanting to only shadow and observe 6 weeks into the practicum, that's when we become concerned. And again, we'll talk about this a lot in session 5. So any questions about the beginning stages of supervision? Okay, moving on. Middle stages of supervision. So Jewel talked about using that ELA as a supervision tool, and I'd highly recommend that you do that. So, pulling out that ELA, if not every supervisory session, at least once a month, kind of looking at, okay, these are the tasks that you are going to do to meet the competencies. How are you progressing in these areas? What are we not doing yet? What do we need to be more intentional about doing? So that's one of the things that I'd encourage you to do regularly. The rest of these bullet points here are just really about reviewing performance and providing feedback. So I'm not going to read everything on this slide, but you're kind of in a groove with things, and you're working with your student around just kind of moving forward, moving on. So, and again, whether it's micro, macro, it's going to differ a little bit. Might be project focused if it's more macro, might be talking about cases if it's more micro. Okay, this is the slide I want to spend a little bit more time on, because this isn't just the task part. This is really the meat of what we're hoping that you are talking about with your student in addition to sort of supervising tasks. One is helping students process feelings about situations that they encounter. So many of us have been doing this for a long time, and we have figured out most of the time how to adapt, how to deal with seeing difficult things, how to take care of ourselves, hopefully. But this is all new for our students, and they may be seeing situations that they've not seen before. And they might be wondering, is this normal to be upset by this? What I've just seen or what I've just experienced. So that's where, as the supervisor, it's really important that you are having conversations with them about how they are feeling, normalizing what they're experiencing, helping them to think about what do they do when they leave the organization and they're still thinking about that client or they're still thinking about that situation. You know, what works for you? What might be other resources that would be helpful to the student? And I have that with providing emotional support because I think they're both very similar in terms of how you're responding to your student. Also having intentional conversations about diversity. So that's one of our competencies in the of the 9 competencies that the Council on Social Work Education has provided for us. It's one of the competencies on the ELA. And so students may be interacting with people that are very different from them. They may be different in age, they may be different in, you know, race or ethnicity or gender identity or sexual orientation or income or religion, or, you know, we can go on and on. But it's really important to be having those conversations with your student about, you know, what is this like to work with somebody who's very different from me? What's it like for you to work with me as a supervisor because we are different? And so really being intentional, again, that's the thing you can't do in the drive-by supervision, right? Where the student's popping into your office and you're giving them information. This is where you're having that more intentional conversation. Discussing issues related to values and ethics is important. And again, when we've been at our jobs for a while, we're dealing with ethical issues every single day, but we've so internalized how we deal with them, we're not thinking about them consciously. But taking a step back and trying to think about where values and ethics coming into play in our workplace, in our organization, you know, in our work with our clients, even in larger, bigger picture social work issues, what are our policy priorities, but really having those intentional conversations with students about values and ethics. And then certainly other things that you can do is provide students with, you know, articles, books, readings. Again, we prepare students in classes, but they're not always prepared to do everything that you do in a very specialized setting. So it's not inappropriate to ask them to do additional reading, or as I think Julie and Wendy both mentioned, you know, having them come in and share what they're learning, having conversations about the more academic and theoretical side of what's going on. And then you can certainly role play and model techniques for them. Students generally hate to role play, but they learn a lot from doing that. But it's something you can offer to do. And, you know, let's play this situation, how this might look with this client. Or, you know, again, sometimes just having the opportunity to shadow you and have you model those techniques for them. So at this stage, students should be given a moderate degree of autonomy. So they shouldn't be just shadowing you at this stage, right? They should be independently engaging in some activities. Again, depending on your setting, you know, they may be the kind of student who is performing really well, they're making good progress. You're comfortable setting them free to manage a small caseload, or, you know, in a hospital setting, make assessments independently. Or maybe the next stage is they are doing and you are watching, you know, and that's a stage that you can also, or a way that you can also kind of keep track of a student who's maybe having a little harder time or taking a little longer or a little less confident. But at some point, we want the students demonstrating the competencies, not just observing and watching you do that. All right. My slide's not advancing. That's weird. That's so weird. Okay, well, try this. No. All right, good. Did I miss one? It's on there, right? Okay, good. All right, so during those final stages, and again, you know, both Wendy and Jewel talked about endings and terminations. So things that you can do in your supervision session is, you know, exploring thoughts and feelings about ending the practicum. For a lot of students, they may have not had positive experiences with closure. So this is a chance to kind of do that or redo that for them. You know, really making it a natural part of the helping process, because they will deal with this issue with clients as well. So you can use it as an opportunity to model positive closure, work with them around how to terminate with clients. And we used to, in one of the sessions, show a video about a client who was having a, kind of a hard time, because he was relating to this client in a lot of different levels. They were both members of a marginalized community, and he wanted to continue to see the client, and the field instructor had to help him understand why that wasn't appropriate or a good idea. But working with them around whatever the plan will be for termination with clients, reviewing status of project and plans for completion if they're in the middle of something that hasn't been completed. Complete the final evaluation forms for the schools is important. Sharing your evaluation with your student so that you can talk about this together is really critical. Field instructors, just kind of as a little aside here, are asked to complete for, I'm gonna get this right, for WashU, for UMSL and for FonFon, there's a midterm evaluation that field instructors submit and a final evaluation. All 4 universities have final evaluation. SLU's midterm is their site visit. And we all actually also do site visits, which is also a way that we evaluate. And I'll talk about that in a couple of minutes. But so those are some of the details that need to be taken care of at the end of practicum. And again, at this stage, students should be working pretty autonomously at whatever their level of learning is. So if they're a BSW student getting ready to graduate, they should be equipped to enter the workforce at a bachelor's level, doing, primary work with clients. If they're a master's student in their foundation, then, at this point, they should be competent to move to the next stage in their learning. And if they're a concentration MSW student, we would hope at this point that they could perform autonomously in the workplace. So that is our goal by the time students leave their practicum. Okay. So group supervision is, I was a kid in the middle for a long time. And one of the things our students loved the best was group supervision. So, they would come together with other students and they would talk about cases, and they would talk about self-care, and they would talk about challenges they were experiencing at school or challenges they were experiencing in the organization. They absolutely loved it. If you're in a large enough organization and you have enough students, I would really encourage you to consider doing some type of group supervision with your practicum students. But I want to remind you that it doesn't replace the supervision hour. So our accrediting body still requires that students are supervised for 1 hour every week by their field instructor. But it's a wonderful, wonderful supplement to their learning if you can do that. Okay, so before I move on to evaluating your student, any questions, anything anybody wants to bring up, talk about, or discuss? No? Okay, so hearing none, we'll go ahead and move on. So evaluation is, it's a source of anxiety for students. Let me say that right away. We've talked about this, I think, a little bit earlier when Jewel talked about just the beginning stages and how anxious students are. People are really anxious about being evaluated. And so students want to do well, right? And Jewel gave the example of like the student who just, maybe doesn't even want to do it if they don't think they can start out doing it perfectly. So I think it's just important when we start talking about evaluation is recognizing that it's anxiety. I don't know. I've been, working for, feels like forever, and kind of has been forever, right? But when you go to do that annual review, I still feel this little bit of anxiety. I think I'm doing a good job, but it can be anxiety provoking. So just important to kind of keep in mind where your student's coming from, when you're engaging in any kind of evaluation. And I know this has already been said, but it's so important. I'm going to say it again. Remember that they're in a learner role and that you expect them to make mistakes. And somebody even put that in the chat. And I thought that was really insightful, because students really need to hear that from you. They need to hear from you. They don't need to be perfect. They don't need to know how to do everything, or they wouldn't be in practicum, and that it's really okay to make mistakes. And if you look at it from the, again, from in the learning literature, we actually learn more from our mistakes than we do from our successes. So, Jules said earlier, I hope you make a mistake. And that's true. And most of the mistakes are, and somebody put this in the chat, most of the mistakes that students make are not life-threatening to the clients, right? I mean, most of the time, there are things they could have maybe done better, but they don't have dire consequences. Because if they shouldn't be in that situation, until they're at a level of learning where they're really competent to deal with those really emergency kinds of things. So just reminding them that it's okay to make mistakes. I teach the Foundation Field Seminar. I have a whole conversation with students about that in the beginning, and I share mistakes I've made. And I think that's just helpful for students to see that, here's somebody who's been practicing for a really long time and who's been in academic for a really long time. I still make mistakes and I learn from those and I do things differently. So I think the more that you can be kind of honest and open with your students about mistakes you've made, setting that expectation that it's okay to make mistakes, it makes them so much more comfortable being open. It feels safer. To talk about what they're not sure about, talk about what they're worried about with you, if you really open that door for them. But I think that has to come from the field instructor, not so much from the student. You really have to provide that permission and open that gate and create that safe environment for them. So in evaluation, basically going to the definition of it, is comparing students' progress to the competencies. That's basically what we're looking at. We have 9 competencies. Students have ELAs. Students have activities in those ELAs that will help them demonstrate the competency. So in the formal sense, that's what evaluation looks like. It's important to remember that there's variation among individual students. Some students come with tons of experience. Some students come with no experience, but there's also different expectations in terms of their levels of learning. So we wouldn't expect that a first semester BSW student will know what a concentration level MSW students know. So that's important when you're evaluating, is always being mindful of the student's level of learning. And again, I think we've already talked about this enough, that really is that ELA that becomes the primary tool, because it outlines the activities and it becomes the basis upon which, as the student moves through the practicum, that you're going to evaluate them. It doesn't mean that you can't modify that ELA or that activities sometimes can change. So for example, a student may, you may find out there's a brand new project you didn't even know about when they did their ELA. But it's going to be really valuable to that student. So you can make additions and modifications. If it becomes substantial, you should let us know at the school. But again, or sometimes when you're doing the evaluation, you're thinking, well, they didn't do as much of X as we thought they would do, but they did Y. And so, as we're evaluating them, we know they've mastered that competency. So informal evaluation should begin on day 1. Sometimes we say it should begin at the interview, right? In terms of providing feedback, but definitely by day 1, we're making assessments. We want that feedback to be frequent, ongoing. And this is important, this next bullet point, increasingly asking your student to take responsibility for self-assessment. Because in social work, our tool is ourselves, right? And, we don't have hammers and all the other kinds of things that people have in some other professions, right? We have ourselves, we're the primary tool. And so to the extent that we can help students learn to become more aware, to self-assess, that's really important. So in the beginning, you might be talking to a student and giving them a lot of feedback. And over time, that might shift to, how do you think that session went? How do you think that conversation went? What do you think you did well? Were there things that maybe you could do differently? And then shift the focus to them. Do you want to know what I think? So, really starting with what they think and moving towards what you think. If you use that approach at first, and there's nothing wrong with doing that early on, but then sometimes students feel really on the spot, right? Like they're not really ready to do that yet. But, as you move through supervision, I would really encourage you to challenge your students to do some self-assessment. And then, as I said earlier, there'll be a midterm evaluation for 3 of the universities and a final evaluation for all of us. And that is something that you will complete, and you'll be asked a variety of questions. Our forms all look a little bit different, but basically all of them are based on whether or not the students have achieved proficiency on the competencies at their level of learning. So again, their level of learning will look different depending on where they are in their progress in their social work career. Research suggests that students prefer supervisors who give them ongoing and critical feedback. That's important. I don't know, at least for me, especially earlier on in my profession, I was really good at giving people positive reinforcement. We're all trained in being strengths-based. So for me, that was easy, right? I could always see what people were doing well. But for me, it was more of a stretch to say, and here's what I don't think you're doing so well, or here's an area of growth for you. But in reality, students, again, need your feedback in order to improve, because if you're not helping them and pointing out mistakes, they don't know how to modify their behavior, right? So it's really important that the feedback be ongoing, not, often at the supervision session, but it can also be in between, if you're meeting with them. Be clear about what your expectations are. And Wendy talked about that in the beginning in terms of getting people oriented to the organization. And always remember that the goal of feedback is learning. Again, people learn from their mistakes. So, and I say that I teach a practice class right now, or I finished in December, but we run groups, and then everybody gives that group leader feedback in the group, and then everybody in the audience gives feedback, and then I give feedback. And I always say to students, this is what you're paying me for. You're paying me for my opinion about what you're doing well and where you can improve. And I just constantly remind them this is about learning. And so I think when things are framed that way, people are more inclined to hear what we're saying. So we are going to go to a breakout group, and I'm going to give you 2 key questions, which are up on your screen. What personal experiences have you had giving and receiving feedback? And then how will you use those experiences to inform the decisions in terms of working with your student? So if you want to go ahead and get into your breakout groups, and I'm looking at the time to try to decide how much time we have. Why don't you take about 12 minutes or so and go ahead and have that conversation with the Okay, everybody, welcome back. I hope you had productive and interesting discussions in your breakout room. We haven't talked a lot of the general group today. So I'd like to take just a couple of minutes for anyone who is comfortable doing so, and we won't hear from everybody, but we'll take 5 minutes or so and just talk about what you talked about in your breakout room, about your experiences giving or receiving feedback, and then how you'll use them to inform the feedback that you will give to your students. So sometimes just helpful comments and suggestions come out of those breakout rooms. And I thought it might be interesting if everybody could or would be able to benefit from some of those conversations. I'm at a little bit of a disadvantage in that I can't see you all, so please just unmute and you can start speaking. Anybody just want to share?
Sure.
I talked
Um,
about how
s-
I give feedback to members in my group, and I always try to start it with, I thought you did really well at, and fill in the blank. I would have liked to have heard more about, and fill in the blank. So it's coming always from that strength-based perspective instead of it feeling negative. But one of the things we mentioned too is the self-care aspect. When we have good self-care, we can receive feedback better. We don't have that negative monologue already going. So we talked about that aspect of it as well. And always the compliment sandwich, 2 positives, 1 improvement.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you, Donetta. Thank you very much. Chen, did you want to add?
This is Chen. So, I think I will always phrase it as, well, it's not a personal attack. It is that it is constructive kind of criticism. What you did wrong in terms of say, I don't know, a code of ethics and whatnot. It is not about, well, you don't, I don't like you. No, nothing like that. In fact, it's the other way around. Because I like you, because I like you to be successful. And that is why we're pointing out, some not so great things that you've done, and here's why. And now also phrase it as in, well, this is a practicum. It is not a paid job. So this is to prepare for you to be a successful professional. Therefore, once you are a the actual paid professional, then there might be, more serious consequences. And if you made a mistake like this, but today, because you're not an actual paid staff person, you are allowed, you're entitled to actually make mistakes, and then we just simply correct the mistakes, and then we move on. And then this is to help you to become successful in the future.
That's great, Jen. Thank you so much. And
Thank
I
you.
see Jewel just making all kinds of body movements and putting things in the chat. I guess you strongly agree, huh? But it
I
is
do. I do. I think there's a dance between learning as a student and being a paid professional. And so I really appreciated hearing that as from a field instructor. I think we keep trying to emphasize that over and over again. And so my body response was, finally, we get to hear it from a field instructor too, that even though you're doing similar things, you're doing it from the perspective of a student.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. And Wendy added in the chat that the point about not personalizing it or taking it personally. And I think that's an important point too. So others, anybody else want to jump in?
So one thing that our group talked about was giving feedback on boundaries, in particular with students who are kind of coming out of a framework that is more idealized than sometimes what actual practice has to offer, in terms of, discharging patients who are homeless and we don't have a place to send them and we still have to discharge them, and not always having a resource for everything, and how to give feedback that doesn't kind of make them more sinister than is necessary, but that also kind of acknowledges the difficulty of that position and strengthens that boundary of, when you have this really difficult situation, it's not okay to just like give the patient 20 of your own dollars from your own pocket kind of thing. And trying to work through some of that, giving feedback around how do you not burn out in this environment, and how do you maintain those boundaries when no one goes into social work because they like to deny people services.
Yeah, good point. Yeah, really good points. Really good points. Kind of coming back to when we talked about, exploring how students are feeling about some of these things that are brand new that they've not seen before. So yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Any other comments? Lynn's put something in the chat.
I was just going to touch on that. I'm so
Go
glad
ahead, Wendy. Yeah.
that she acknowledged that. When we do give that feedback, we want to make sure that it is like authentic and it's real time and is relevant to what they're doing, and making sure that it is, it's not like you did a good job with this and then, but this is what you're not doing so well, but you're doing a really good job. So really making sure that it's authentic and that it is, pertaining to actionable things, observable things that you're seeing that they're making progress on. And, not fluff. They very much need and deserve to have feedback that is authentic, that is going to push them in the direction of growth. And then us, from that point, making sure that we provide leadership and mentorship and shadowing experiences for them to grow in those areas where they may not have the skills yet.
Great.
Thank you for that, Lynn.
Yeah, thank you, Lynn. Thank you, Wendy. We have time for one more comment if anybody has one, and then I'd like to move along so you can get another break.
I have one.
Yes.
Yeah, so I kind of talked about the fact that I often am in a room full of like lots of clients at the same time. And a lot of times they don't like the activity that we're doing, and they are very vocal about that, and not necessarily in the most kind manner. And so I've had to really learn that I'm not a taco and I can't make everybody happy. That's what I tell everybody. And so that's something that I've had to really scale back on since I was a student. Because as a student, I was constantly kind of running around and trying to make everybody happy. And I've had to kind of learn that I can make as many people happy as possible, but I'm never going to make everybody happy, and that's okay. I think that's a thing that I've noticed that a lot of students kind of struggle with.
Great. Thank you so much for sharing that, Gabrielle. And somebody mentioned it depends on how the feedback is offered. And I'm trying to advance my slide because that is the next thing we're going to talk about. I think what must happen is when I pause. Okay, can you all see that? Okay, so some suggestions for giving feedback. You want your feedback to be reciprocal. In other words, asking them for feedback for you as well as you for them, having it be balanced. And I think we've had a lot of conversation about sharing both what people are doing well and where they could improve. Hopefully it's useful. And it's reciprocal and it's timely. And so timely is important, and that, you know, if it's something that needs to happen immediately, maybe not even waiting till your next supervision session, you know, because people, when they're in the moment, if you happen to be there, that's a good time to offer that feedback. Sometimes it does have to wait, you know, depending on the agency circumstances. Another thing that's not on here that I've learned and practiced and read a lot about is delivering feedback with empathy. So people are more likely to receive feedback if they get the sense that you understand them. And so, you know, just we've all learned empathy in school and use it every day in our profession and hopefully in our lives. But, you know, just saying to the student, you know, I know this must be tough for you. Or, you know, when I was a student, this was really challenging for me. Or, you know, whatever it is that you need to say to that student, that they feel that you understand and that you're delivering this feedback as a way of supporting them. And as Chen said, you know, helping them develop professionally, that it's not a personal criticism. So those are just some suggestions in terms of how you might want to offer feedback. Some things to avoid when you're offering feedback is the halo effect, which is the tendency to rate everybody the same. Regardless of in all the same area. I'm sorry, I'm getting mixed up myself here. The halo effect is the tendency to rate the student the same in all areas based on performance in a few areas. So, you know, we all have strengths and we all have growth areas. And if you have a wonderful student, they may be a wonderful student and they may be doing wonderful work, but they may not be equally wonderful at every task. So really, when you do their evaluations, giving them your honest assessment in each of those areas. And we have very detailed evaluation forms where you have the opportunity to do that. The other is the attraction to average, which is basically giving everybody the same rating despite performance differences. Or the leniency bias where, you know, you don't want to hurt somebody's feelings, so you're going to inflate everything you do. Again, a lot of research on that, even on teaching evaluations, they tend to be inflated. And then the strictness bias, which is tending to rate everyone on the lower side. And that generally comes for two reasons. One is maybe unrealistic expectations for performance. So remembering again the level of learning of the student, whether they're a first semester bachelor student, your expectation would not be they know what a second semester concentration students know. And also some people have this idea, like if I give them a lower score on the midterm, or, you know, I rank them lower on the competencies at the site visit, it will encourage them to work harder. Or what will I do at the end if I've given them proficiency now on all of these competencies? But at the end of the day, what we really want you to do is just evaluate them honestly. And so, you know, you don't need to be overly strict, overly lenient, just, you know, really trying to give them a good assessment of their performance where they are right now. And then, oh, I hate to end on this topic, and I always get this one, is what to do when problems arise. So 99% of the time you will not have a problem, but you may have some challenges with students. And some of the common ones that we see are poor writing, tardiness, frequent absences, kind of some of those professional behavior kind of ideas, unprofessional presentation of self, or they have issues outside of the practicum, which this is actually, you know, happens because it's real life, right? A lot of our students have other issues. And so how did this happen? Okay, good. My whole screen went weird. So, you know, they may have mental health challenges. They may have, you know, their caregivers. They're dealing with an unexpected crisis in their life. And so, you know, it's up to you as a field instructor to figure out how to manage these. But I want to say that you are not alone when you are managing these kinds of situations. So don't ever, ever, ever hesitate to call on us. And so we've done this for a long time. Even the 4 field directors, we talk to each other because sometimes we get novel situations and we're not sure, you know, how to best advise a field instructor. So, you know, reach out to the faculty liaison, reach out to one of us, and we will be willing and able and hopefully can help you resolve some of these things that you encounter. Some of them are just because people haven't been in the workforce, right? They don't understand that it's not okay, that this is like a paid job. They need to show up. They need to show up on time, you know, so those are some of the kinds of things that that are really skill-based, you know, that you can teach. Other times when they're having mental health issues, you might be having to have a real honest conversation about helping them get help, not to become their therapist, but, you know, how do you help them get the help they need? How do you help them get the resources they need? Is this the time in their life they need to be doing practicum, or do they need to take a break? So those are the kinds of conversations when you see problems arising that you might want to have. And again, we're always happy to talk these through. You are not getting your student in trouble if you call us. We're there to support you as much as we are to support the students, because if we support our field instructors, then our students ultimately have a good learning experience. So again, it's the same. Don't feel like where we tell students don't feel like they need to know everything. You don't need to know everything either. We're always there to loan support. So on the next slide, thank you, Jewel, is evaluating your student. Oh, we did that one already. Okay, so maybe we're going to go in the other direction. All right, so steps to take. So again, you know, meeting regularly with your student, giving feedback, honestly, balanced, timely is the most important. But if you get to the point where, you know, this is a pretty serious concern that you have, you should begin to document the problematic behavior, taking this in a more formal way to the student about what's happened, developing a plan to address the behavior, and then giving them time to make improvement. Again, you may have already talked to us before you do any of these things, but at some point, particularly if you're thinking this just isn't going to work, if this student doesn't make some pretty significant changes, this practicum may not work out for us at the agency or for the student. So that's when you really want to begin this process of documenting, meeting, giving them time to execute a performance improvement plan, and giving them feedback. Next slide. Thank you, Joel. So again, documenting is important, letting the students know the consequences, contacting us at any point along the way, but certainly if you're at this point, we really need to be looped in. We're hoping that maybe you've talked to us before that, but if it's really at the problem where you think this placement could disrupt, we need to know that. And again, that's the field liaison or somebody, one of us in the Office of Field Education. If the issue is so severe, and again, I always hate ending on this note, and it happens rarely, but if there's an issue that is so severe that you need to terminate a student immediately. So, you know, they come to the practicum site intoxicated, they've slept with a client, you know, there's been some egregious ethical violation, they're stealing from the agency. Again, almost never happens, but if that happens and you need to terminate them, then please let us know right away, because then we have to make decisions about what's this student's future in a social work program, particularly when there's been a very serious ethical violation. You know, we're all gatekeepers. We rely on you to be gatekeepers, you know, in your work as field instructors, and then we have to be gatekeepers for our profession, all of us together in partnership. So, you know, in those situations, we absolutely need to know what's happened, you know, at a significant level of detail, so then we can go to our own respective, we have the personnel policy committee, for example, at UMSL, where we look at issues of student conduct. Every school has a process for that. And I think that's my last slide. And we're here to support you. Again, don't hesitate to reach out to us. And you have now a 15-minute break. And Libby will come back at 3:30, and Libby will be presenting some information, and then we're going to get to what I think is the best part. You're going to hear from a panel of field instructors. So thank you all.
Okay, hello everyone. I think we are all back from our break, and hopefully everyone had a minute to just get refreshed and feel ready. I wanted to address a question that is in the chat. We had one individual asked that if a student is struggling with their mental health during the practicum and not meeting the competency standards or behaviors and skills, who takes the lead on that? Would it be the field instructor or a task instructor or other members of the team? And over the break, the directors, we all were talking about that, and our answer or suggestion to that would be that if it's a task instructor or other members of the team, that they bring that to the field instructor, and that then together all of the team can approach the field education director of that school the student belongs to, or the field instructor themselves can directly just individually talk to the field education director of that school. Of course, you can talk to any one of us, but we really think going to that field education director of the school the student is enrolled in is the most appropriate choice. And then from there, you can kind of discuss next steps, or the field education director can obviously reach out to that student and discuss, having a meeting between the field education between yourself, the field education director, and the field instructor to see what is going on, making sure they're getting the right resources and the proper support. So hopefully that does answer the question. If you need more information or need assistance, we can always talk offline with you about that. So hopefully that does help. Would any other director like to add any other information to that? Okay, just want to make sure. And thank you, Jessica. You're welcome to answer that, that you got the answer to that question. All right, so I am going to go ahead and share my screen. I am with Jewel and her generation as well. So I have a little bit of technical savvy, but it was really with the PowerPoint generation I grew up. So let me make sure I can get the correct one here that I need to actually pull up. I think it's this one. Yes, it is. Okay. Present. Hello. Present. There we go. Okay, can you go? Oh, Jiminy Cricket. Okay. Sorry, I gotta go all the way down. Please close your eyes if this makes you dizzy. Oh, what the bleep? Okay, I'm sorry. Go again. Sorry, please close your eyes again. Okay. You can open them again if you had to close them for the dizziness of that. I apologize for that. So we are going to be talking about what our standards are for the collaborative with our different schools within the BSW and the MSW programs. As you all probably know, each of our schools have either a BSW or an MSW or both a BSW and an MSW program, if we're not confusing enough. So for Font Bond, that's at the top of the page. I'll go down and just kind of go through that. We do have a BSW degree. Now these numbers are not going to be correct or updated potentially. Our number is lower than 60, unfortunately, right now. We do have a credit requirement of 120 hours that students have to complete to be able to graduate with a BSW degree. We obviously do not have advanced standing because it's a 4-year degree. We do ask that students have a practicum both semesters of their senior year, so they have to complete 2 practicums. It is a pass or fail grading system. And for field instructor requirements, they have to be 3 years post BSW graduation or 2 years post master's degree. And they have to be 1 year at their agency that they are employed at. Just know that that's, important, and they have to be from an accredited, a CSWE accredited university. For the practicum hour requirements, each practicum needs to be 240 hours each in total. And so that's for each semester. Each practicum is 4 credit hours each. I don't know if that's really important to you guys, but just so you know, that's how many credits they actually have to, how much they earn for that practicum piece. And then that also does not include a seminar course that they attend, which I think Jewel and Patty and Wendy both talked about earlier, which is that 1-hour class they take in conjunction with the practicum, where they get to discuss like hot topics, challenges, and successes with their cohort while they're in practicum during the week. For St. Louis University, they have a BSW and an MSW degree. They have about 80 in the BSW and 170 in the MSW. For the BSW, like Font Bond, and you'll see this across the board for BSW programs, it's a required 120-hour credit earned to graduate with their BSW degree. Again, there's not an advanced standing option. They do require 2 semesters of practicums, and it is a satisfactory and unsatisfactory. Please correct me, Wendy, if that's incorrect. Pass or fail type of grading system. For field instructor requirements, it's 2 years post MSW degree and 1 year in their position at their agency site. For their hours, and again, this is going to be very similar because it is CSWE required. It's a 240-hour per semester requirement for their hour earned. So again, as you see this through the BSW, you're going to see that it's at 240 hours. The 6 credit hours is there for their earned credit hours for practicum. For their MSW degree, they need 48 hours for graduation, 53 with the MSW and ABA degree. They can accept BSW social workers into the MSW program. Up to 15 credit hours are accepted. So almost half of those credits. They do foundation and for the first semester, and the second semester is concentration of their practicum. So it's really kind of like a generalist type of foundation in their first semester. Second semester is when they pick their concentration level. So those who have masters understand that more. For grading system, again, it's the same. And then 2 years postmasters for the requirement for field instructor. And then again, 1 year in that position at the agency you're at. And then you can see here again, the hour requirements, it's 300 hours for foundation practicum, again, 300 hours for concentration practicum. And you can see that the credits are the same for both of those. For UMSL's BSW program, they have about 270 for that program. Again, 120 credit hours are needed to graduate. There's both semesters are obviously required for a BSW practicum placement as well. Same grading system. And then 3 years post BSW for the field instructor requirement, or 2 years post MSW for field instructor requirement. Again, it's a two semester practicum placement, and then 285 hours each for each semester, and they're 4 credit hours each. For UMSL, for their MSW program, they have about 150 students enrolled. 60 hours are required to graduate with an MSW. They will accept up to 24 credit hours with a BSW to their program for masters. They also have a satisfactory and unsatisfactory, credit grading for that program. And for the field instructor, an MSW needs to be 2 years post-graduation. And then you can see here, just like the other MSW programs, they have a foundation semester practicum and a concentration semester practicum. And you can see here, there's 300 hours for both of those that need to be met. For the Brown School at WashU, they have an MSW program only, and they have about 400 students enrolled. 60 credit hours are required to graduate with a master's. They accept about 19 credits and evidence-based practice course that they have to take to be advanced standing in that program. It's a pass-fail grading system. To be a field instructor with that, you need to be 2 years post-masters and 1 year in your position. And then for the 2 semesters of practicum, you need to have your foundation level first, which again is 360 hours, and then a concentration semesters, which is 600 hours. So you can see they vary a little in terms of, for most part, the field instructor requirements and the practicum hour requirements. So just making sure when you get those learning agreements, when you get those practicum registration forms, that you're looking at those from the different schools to ensure that you're meeting the correct hours, to ensure you're meeting the correct amount of semesters they need to be there, and that you're meeting your field instructor requirements as well. Okay. So that doesn't want to. So Patty, I seem to be, oh, there we go. I was gonna say, I'm seeming to have the same issues. Okay, there we go. So we're gonna move on to just the education requirements and program features. So some things we're looking at is that the practicum processes for students, when we're looking at them to pick a practicum placement, is student driven, and it's a self-selection process. So typically all of our programs have students prepare prior to their practicum, typically a semester prior or at least a summer prior, depending on when they're going to be starting their practicum. And they are selecting themselves the agency that they want to go to. So they have that ownership of learning. They're researching different agencies. They're looking through what options are available, your agencies that are in the database after finishing the requirements of these trainings. And they're getting excited about what are the different missions of your agencies, what are the populations you're working with, what are the things that they can do as a practicum student, and really learning and getting involved personally with what type of things that they can be doing with you. And they're really getting to research through connection, through contact with you, through emails, through resume building, through all of these different types of things. And really just wanting to learn more about that. So you may be getting emails from them, you may be getting phone calls from them, you may be, just having connections with them through the website, or however it is that contact form may be on your internet site for your agency, to have interest in practicum forms. So making sure that you're keeping up with that, or whoever the contact person is at your agency, to make sure they're keeping up with that, to ensure that information is getting to who it needs to go to, so that the students are getting back, they're getting back in touch with whoever the person is at that agency. Because I know some things that we're finding, and I don't know if the other schools are seeing this, is that students will reach out and agencies may not get back to them. And that can be really disheartening and really frustrating for students when they're contacting several agencies and some of them are not getting back to them. So that can be really tough, especially when they're super gung-ho and they're like, I really want to go do a practicum. So making sure that we're keeping up with that as well. So once the student gets in touch with you and you're getting back with them and communicating with them and saying, yeah, we do take internship practicum students, we're taking them for this semester. There's the interviewing process and making sure that you want them to be obviously a good match and a good fit. So part of that is providing a consistent interview process across the board. Just like you're interviewing for a job or a position at your agency, it's going to be very similar. You want to have the same process for each student that you're interviewing for a practicum. You definitely want to describe the agency culture. You want to describe the agency environment. You definitely want to also evaluate, like, what are the interpersonal skills and work experience of that student. You're going to have some students that come in and they have a lot of maybe social work experience or volunteer experience or just knowledge of what that is, even as maybe a freshman or first year social work student. And then you may have students that come in and they have zero experience, zero knowledge of the social work world. And so knowing, how do you evaluate that in a fair and balanced and unbiased way? You also want to discuss with them, what are the scheduling expectations? What are the requirements of the job? What are their expectations and their anticipations of the job as well? So you're getting kind of what the reality is and what their idea of it as well, to make sure that that's meshing and to see kind of where their baseline is. And then you want to discuss with them practicum learning opportunities and activities. It can be a really good idea to have them bring their learning agreement with them, maybe bring the course syllabus with them to the interview so you can go over that together to ensure that, your understanding and their understanding kind of what that process looks like. So seminars, so we've talked about this already a little bit, but the seminars are part of the field education process. They're in conjunction with the practicum during the full semester, during the 2 semesters that students are in their practicum. So they meet once a week, typically for about an hour, hour and 20 minutes. And it's with the whole cohort that the students are going through during their practicum. They meet, it's really just kind of a discussion of hot topics, discussion of challenges, discussion of ethical dilemmas, discussion of successes the students may have had, discussion of like competency, cultural competence, all of these things that they're going through during the week. So it's almost like an extra kind of cushion for supervision. It doesn't replace supervision at all, but it's an extra kind of step for those students to kind of decompress from the week. And it's a really great place for these students. It's a really great place for us as directors and teachers to sit there and kind of learn from them as well. I think maybe we learn more than the students do sometimes. It's really great and fun. It helps them with that critical thinking and problem solving, and really helps them connect the academic to the in-field experience. Okay, so I don't know if I went through that actually too quick or not, but we're going to take just a couple minutes just to switch over to the panel and make sure they all get into the into our session here really quick, and then we'll be back in just a couple minutes and we'll introduce our panel and ask them some questions, and then give you all some time to ask some questions to them as well. All right.
And also a field instructor with behavioral health response.
Hi, I'm Chen Hong, and I am a field instructor, and then I work for Voice, and our program is all about gerontology and long-term care.
Hi, my name is Ebony Hutchinson. I am a field instructor and the executive director of the Community Reach, and that is a nonprofit that works on making specialized mental health services accessible to underserved and marginalized populations.
Hi, everyone. My name is Zaid, and I'm a second-year MSW student at WashU.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you. Wow, that was loud. I'm sorry. I just got feedback or something on my mic. All right. So question number one, and this is for all four of you, so anyone can jump in on this. So what challenges and strengths do you see for yourself as a field instructor?
Well, let me, Jenny, do you want to go?
No, go ahead, please.
Oh, okay. Oh, okay. Thank you. So, I think I think earlier I talked briefly about the to kind of break the bad news to the students. Well, you kind of messed up on this place, and then, well, you did something wrong that place, right? I think that is a challenging part of this position, this job, that when we have to do that with a student, because I also always assume that students, they come here with great passion. They want to be able to do good, and then they want to have great performance, all of those, right? Sure. But then, I don't want to break their heart. So so with that, I'm gonna have to actually kind of give them bad news in a way that it is gentle, it is also constructive, and also it is helpful and beneficial for them. And now, that being said, I think the even harder part is that when a student actually made some kind of mistakes that there's no way to actually rescue them back from what they did. So I actually had that a couple of years ago, that a student actually he was a no call, no show, and for like a month, and then he was telling me that his family, they got medical emergency in Chicago, and then he was away for a month, and so on and so forth. And then, until I couldn't find him, I started feeling kind of weird, so I reached out to school. Turned out he never missed a day in a class. and then so he was in school the entire time. So that, you know, I'm not gonna go into more details about that, but then my thing is that, you know, to lie about that, it is unethical, and now I had to let him go, which actually is very difficult for me, and because we are not paying this kid for doing things in my office. The problem is that they have to learn. I mean, students, they have to learn from this mistake. Now, you know, we did not pay him for what he did, sure, but then in the meantime, you know, that makes it easier for him, so that you made this mistake and then it's a couple of months that you know, quote unquote waste of your time, so that you didn't get any credits for whatever you did. Now, that being said, it's gonna make it more easier for him to accept that versus, you know, in the future, if he is actually in a paid job, in an actual career employment, he's gonna actually, you know, ruin his own future. So I think it that way, then I feel a little bit better. So
Thank you, Jenny. I know you wanted to add to that.
Yeah, for myself, I look at my time with students as paying it forward. You know, I know that all of the coursework that I had is within me someplace. However, I can easily go back and tap into my practicum experience, the feedback that I receive from the field instructors and other staff. So I look at my time with students as so rewarding by getting to know them as persons, developing a relationship with them, watching their confidence blossom and grow, and also tapping into the passion, as Jan said, that they bring, and being somewhat excited how they utilize technology. And I try to look at it as a two-way street in terms of, you know, me learning from them, and trying to, you know, create ways that help them facilitate knowing their place within social work. In terms of the challenges, like Chien said, having those difficult conversations is really tough for me. If someone is consistently late, if it seems that they're distracted by their phones or coursework, they may not have a good work ethic or prioritize practicum, or there just seems to be a disconnect, either a lack of empathy for clients that we work with, or someone who may question the agency's policy instead of embracing this as a learning experience. That can be really tough. So for me, through the years, I embrace a student who brings about just a healthy level of anxiety because they want to do well. They're receptive to feedback versus someone who comes in, whether they have social work experience or not, but they come in overly confident. To me, you know, that's scary. And, you know, sometimes the overly confident student, things begin to crumble, or they may not be receptive to feedback.
Thank you, Jenny, so much. Ebony, would you like to add anything?
Yes. So for me, I would say that one of the most challenging things is working with first generation or students who may not present in the way that mainstream society identifies as scholastic, and having to be able to assist them. And I feel like that at the Community Reach, we do more than just work with them with the tasks that they're assigned as a student, as an intern. we also look at the longevity. So I'm thinking about that I have this first generation student who is probably the only person in their entire family that's ever gone to college, potentially even let alone gone to grad school, in their neighborhoods, in their communities. They're working 2 jobs, they're going to school full time, and thinking about that this is their opportunity to have someone be able to train them and develop them in a way where they're going to be able to be successful, because social work is a very white space. Understanding, being a product from the institution that I went to, being in this field for a while, and understanding what these students may be up against when they get their first jobs. So we do a lot of development and assisting these students to be able to transition, not code switch, not breaking them, not making them not authentic to who they are, but teaching them how to bring all those things together and to operate in spaces that are not historically kind or receptive or welcoming to someone that represents their identity or their background. So I hope that makes sense.
Yes, thank you so much. Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. Thank you. And I don't want to leave you out. I know you're a student. Is there anything that you would add in terms of what you see as field instructors in your practicums as challenges or strengths?
So you're asking what I see as strengths for the field instructor?
Yes, or challenges.
So my field instructor and I, we had a really great relationship. And I think part of the reason that we did is because outside of the work that we were doing, she genuinely tried to get to know me. And so we sort of had a rapport outside of just work. And I genuinely like her. And she genuinely liked me. And so I not only wanted to do good work for the practicum experience, but also because I wanted to do good work for her. So I think it kind of created a really good relationship in that way. And I think that was one of her biggest strengths. Another strength I think she had was that she made a mistake once and she apologized. And I was really impressed by that, because I think it's really hard for anyone to apologize, but especially when you're in a managerial position. And then I think maybe the biggest weakness is maybe just like having time to really provide skill development. I think a lot of the work I did was sort of like I was motivating myself or figuring things out by myself. And I think I could have used maybe a little bit more development.
Thank you. Oh my gosh, all fantastic feedback. Oh my goodness. So I'm going to skip around here because I want to make sure we hit some questions that I think would be great for new field instructors. So have any of you done remote practicums with students? And if so, what are some of the challenges or tips, tools, do's and don'ts, successes that maybe you've had with that?
So, no, Ebony, go ahead.
I'll be really quick. I was going to say, just if you're doing remote, I honestly would say that you probably, depending on the bandwidth of who's the field instructor, you probably want to be able to have multiple check-ins throughout the week, not just that one time set aside for supervision. And if the field instructor doesn't have the bandwidth to be able to do multiple like check-ins, then a task instructor, because what I found with remote, people are easily distracted. And if you're assigning people projects and tasks, like you're just going to need to be able to have multiple touch points throughout that week.
So I think during COVID, we all had to kind of adjust into using Zoom, using all kinds of remote kind of approach or technology to actually get our practicum done, our supervision done, and all of that. I wish that will never happen happen again. Now, that said, because while Zoom, of course, it's convenient, like what we're doing now, we don't have to all go to Fangbang or go to WashU, SLU to get together, and then that's great. The problem though is that now when we're doing remote, we're gonna have to actually pay extra attention on if the students actually are doing the work that they're supposed to do. And that actually is more tiring than you are actually physically working with them. So, and then I remember I had a student. Now she's actually my staff. So Kayla, when I took her, she told me that was when during COVID, the beginning of COVID, and she was pregnant. She actually asked me that is that okay that she's pregnant? Am I still wanting her? I'm like, sure. Why don't I want you when you're pregnant? So then in the entire time I was doing practicum with her, I only see her face, and which did not change at all. And then, but I did not know it. I couldn't see that she's pregnant until one day she showed up in the office and then I'm like, oh wow, you're really pregnant. And then after that, she gave birth and she came back to work second week after she gave birth, and then she kept it going and on. So one day, as we were doing our practicum, the supervision again, she kept bouncing like this. So, and then and at first I didn't want to ask. And then turned out I started asking because it's through Zoom, it's through the video. And then she goes, yeah, I'm sitting on my yoga ball. And then so helping her with the recovery for that. And what do I know? I'm a guy. So what I'm saying is that, it's fun to a certain degree. It is convenient to a certain degree. And now it's a lot of inconvenience of this remote thing. So I do not take remote students anymore. And that is why.
Just to add, so BHR since the pandemic is 100% remote. So during the pandemic, the offices actually moved, and the new office space within Del Mar Divine is not set up for any clinicians to work in the office. So with that said, I am not a part of the interview process, but I should tap into those that do interview students to ask how they may get a sense of the person's work ethic. I do know that BHR has, tracking devices. They can literally track all the time that we're spending on the computer, time away from the computer. For students, their main role is answering the crisis line. So there's a system in which tracks the amount of time that a student is on ready to receive calls, as well as if they're on break or documentation, as well as if a student misses a call or does not answer a call that's ringing into them. So it does leave some questions in terms of how students are managing their time. However, there are many students that are stellar, but for those that may not have a good work ethic, it can be easy for them to go under the radar if someone is not really monitoring them. But with that said, we also utilize Microsoft Teams. So if a student has a question at any time, if I'm not available, there's always what we call a lead clinician that is monitoring Teams for any questions. So literally there is someone available or a group of persons who are available 24/7 to provide in the moment support. But my heart does go out to any student who's learning this and doesn't have someone within arm's length that they can ask a question to.
As a student, do you feel like remote is more popular or something students gravitate towards instead of in person, or do you think it's fairly equal?
So I can speak for myself in terms of remote work. I worked remotely for my practicum. Most of it was remote. And I would say the biggest challenge for me with remote work, I think Jenny was speaking to this, is that you have to really create an environment that's conducive for the work. And when you're in a workplace, you have automatic extrinsic motivation because your supervisor's right there. But when you're working by yourself, you have to create that. And I realized that sort of as I went on, and it would have been helpful if someone, so as I went on, I realized I need to work in a library or a cafe or something where the environment is kind of creating that workplace. But it would have been nice if a field instructor had told me that. But personally, I do really love remote work. I think there are lots of benefits to it. I think being a woman of color, I think a lot of Black women also, there's like research that says a lot of Black women or women in general prefer remote work because it allows flexibility. You, maybe some of the fears around discrimination aren't as much there. So I think there are lots of benefits in that way. Students, a lot of students that I've spoken to, it's sort of mixed. It depends on personality. It depends on what they're looking for. I think some students do prefer it because a lot of students are working part-time. And so it can kind of fit a little bit easier into their schedule. And then I think other students may want that in-person interaction if they're a little bit more outgoing and social. So I think it kind of depends person to person, but I do think allowing that flexibility is probably helpful in creating a more diverse work environment. If you want to invite different kinds of students to your office, I think it and allowing people who have multiple intelligences, right? Like maybe not all students, maybe students who are suffering from anxiety, you know, remote work might be a little bit better for them. So I think remote work, maybe allowing it is really helpful, but guiding students in having it be like letting them know what some of the challenges are would be necessary.
Fantastic feedback. Thank you. I think we have time for one, maybe more question. And this is just going to be kind of an open question about international students. Have any of you worked with international students or done international practicums? Okay, Chen, yes. So having international students, do you feel like there are differences that need to be considered with international students from American students or even non-traditional students? And what do you think those are?
So I can actually speak from both sides. And here's why, because I was an international student myself 20 something years ago. And so now let's start with one. You know, living in this town in St. Louis, the transportation, public transportation just is bad. It sucks, right? So there's no way for an international student to, you know, do public transportation and taking bus, taking metro to go to practicum site and then to go to visit clients and whatnot. It is just very difficult. So as an international student myself, the first year of my being a social work student, I did not do any practicum. It's not just that I was not prepared yet. I mean, social work wise, it's also that I did not have a car my first year. So that is actually a very, very just a realistic kind of issue. That's why when I now interview my students, of course, I wanted to see if they can communicate, if they can, you know, if they have enough passion, if they have, you know, the understanding about what they're gonna get themselves into and all of those things, right? Do they have a car? Can they drive in the United States? That's actually one very, very basic question that you know, us, we kind of take that for granted, that we don't even think about it. And then that's, you know, for international students, yes, that's very important. Now, The second thing about the international student, you guys know that I still have an accent after 20 something years later, right? So then I think it works for my benefit so that people listen to me, and that's fine. So now here's the thing. A lot of times, especially depending on what clientele your agency they work with. Now my residents, again, my organization, my program, we work with older adults and that live in long-term care. Now, older adults living in long-term care, a lot of them, they wear hearing aids already, and then they are wearing hearing aids, and on top of that, if a student has a very strong accent, then that is a torture to my residents, to my clients, right? So then I have to actually think about that. So when I interview a student, if I cannot even understand a student, if I have a hard time understanding a student, then that's going to be even more challenging for my residents with hearing aids on to understand a student. And so I have to take that into my consideration as well.
Thank you. Does either Jenny or Ebony have anything to add to international students, or have you worked with them before?
I have, but I don't feel like I have anything beneficial to add.
Yeah, I have worked with them. And again, it's just wonderful watching their confidence grow. I would say that oftentimes there's more of a shyness or an introvertedness with the international students that I've worked with. And it's just wonderful to watch those layers peel away as their confidence grows and they begin to even be more assertive within the agency, as well as with some of the clients that they're paired with. And it's just thrilling for me as a field instructor also to have those conversations with them about their native culture, especially in terms of how mental health is identified or stigmatized. What are common mental health practices? And then with my area of suicide assessment, prevention, how is that, for them in their culture?
Thank you. Thank you. All right. So I do want to just, let's see, let me ask real quick. Are there any burning questions that any participants have that they would like to ask the panel? And if you do, I would ask you to just put it in the chat. I'll give you guys a few minutes to do that because I know I am a slow typer. Oh, Patty, you raised your hand. Yes, go ahead, Patty.
While people are typing into the chat, I just wanted to add a little bit about
Please.
international students. I think that, it's important to remember you're looking at students who are often the best and the brightest students in their countries when they come here. So, I think sometimes there's a little trepidation about taking an international student because of language barriers and some of those issues. But I've seen just such beautiful experiences that students have had and field instructors have had. And I'm thinking back to one student who was a little bit timid, who was working with older adults, was a little bit of an issue with the language. But over time, as she became confident and, the residents began to accept this individual, by moving through this practicum, I mean, she had a whole presentation for these older adults about her wedding and brought her wedding dress and talked about her wedding and the customs. And I mean, it really turned out to be such a wonderful experience, both for those residents and for the students. So I think even when language is an issue, and it doesn't loan itself to every setting, but if there's a setting where students can begin with doing some other kinds of activities that don't involve speaking on the phone to an older adult, for example, you can really help them develop into having great experiences and the clients benefiting so much. But, everything is very site specific as well.
And I want to
Thank you, Patty.
it's not a question, Patty, it's a kind of a feedback. Thank you for saying that these students are the best, the brightest, and I know that's not true because I know me. So but thank you.
And stop. We did have one question in the chat about speaking to strategies for working with students and developing learning agreements. Are there any kind of strategies that all of you use for that? And that goes for all four of you.
For Jenny, go ahead. So for me, I usually want my students, because they actually come kind of prepared, because their teachers actually kind of go through how to do that, what is appropriate to put down in your forms and whatnot in school, or at least that they have a discussion with their classmates. So usually what happens is that I want them to come in with at least a draft, and then I go through the draft with them, and then we find the best ones that we both agree on, and that is how I usually get my learning agreement done.
Yeah, and I would emphasize that as well. I think every agency is a little bit different. So take into consideration how much training, how much knowledge the student has of the agency and their responsibilities throughout the semester. If anything, they may have a sense of what they will be doing initially, but hopefully you can.
What would it take for you to want to date someone plus size?
But hopefully you have a sense of the progression of the student's learning. And like Chien said, the last thing I want is a student to come to me with just a blank template of their learning agreement. I at least want them to bring a rough draft that we can hone together.
Excellent. And Ebony, I saw you put in a response there in the chat. Is that okay if I read it? Ebony, you look frozen there. Okay.
Yes.
So Ebony, you put in there that you just provide a sample template for students to review and go over, and that you go over them again with that in the orientation that you provide students before they start their practicum with your organization, which is fantastic. So
yeah, I just kind of feel like we have clinicians, and I'm speaking from clinicians, but like treatment plans, like you have people who have been treating for 6, 7, 10 years and can't pass an insurance audit with like a treatment plan or something. Like, so if we who have been doing the work with these things kind of struggle, I think that it's like nice to be able to provide the student with a template, like kind of what it looks like. And then I saw Patty ask me a question. No, did somebody ask
self-care? You do such a good job talking about self-care and how you teach students self-care.
Yes.
If you could respond to that question, I'd love to hear.
Yes. So I think across the board now in this field, like I just really worry that we're going to just see this mass exodus, and we're not going to have folks that are able to do this work because it's hard. It's just getting harder. And so what we do is we provide our BSW students get 2 hours a week, and our MSW students get 2.5 and then 3.5 hours a week. We combined it for self-care and professional development. So if you're applying for grad school, like you can use some of that time. If you're taking your test for your LMSW, you can use that. But for self-care, each week, our students are able to track a 1.5 to 2 hours, and they come to supervision and they explain how they're using that. And our goal with that is to be able to teach them in real time how to take care of themselves, how to reduce the impact of vicarious trauma, burnout, because now, like, nobody's safe. Sorry to say, regardless of which identity you have, your socioeconomic class, where you live at, like, we're all, because all the things that are going on in the world is on fire. We're all at risk for doing this work and it taking a toll on our personhood. And so I feel like a lot of us that are in the field and have been doing it, we are horrible at this. And so if we start teaching them right away how to do this, what it looks like, it's more than just stretching, taking a nap, taking bubble baths. It's even thinking about the way that you approach the work that you do now. Like, I'm in a crossroads where I'm trying to figure out, why am I doing what I'm doing? A lot of what I do because I'm great at it, I'm good at it, people recognize it, but how much of it really aligns to what I am really passionate about in this moment, and being okay with making a pivot professionally. And I wouldn't have been able to do that if I didn't start taking more of that time to look inward to myself, to sit with myself, to carve time out, to really get to know myself in more depth. And so I think that that's probably one of the greatest gifts that we can give newbies coming into the field.
And I think that also comes into play modeling self-care and talking about it during supervision. And also, just to put a plug regarding supervision, to have that 1 hour dedicated for the student every week and be fully attentive to them. Certainly, I expect a student to be fully attentive to the clients that they work with, to give their full attention to me during that hour of supervision. But I think we also need to model that as well, because I've seen students as well as field instructors at different places of that continuum.
Beautiful, beautiful. Does any of you have any last points that you would like to add about any part of the practicum experience that you would like to just share, or any burning last thing you would like to bring to the group?
Yes, this is Susan Cook. If no, I don't want to go or push before anyone else, but may I speak, please?
Oh my gosh, yes, please.
Okay. How is everyone today? And I know we're almost out of time, but I'm going to say this as quickly as I can. The last young lady that spoke, Ebony, she caught my attention when she was speaking to self-care, which my student and myself, every supervision hour that we have weekly, we talk about self-care and what she did for self-care. And sometimes we laugh about it because she just went out and hung out with her friends or something, and the little stories be funny. But I have a course that I created called How to Embrace a Self-Love Experience. It includes 5 modules to it. And it also talks about the difference between self-care and self-love. So when she was speaking to that, it just reminded me of the course that I created. And it talks about how self-love is different, and people see that people often think that self-love and self-care are the same thing, like taking a bubble bath or going for a walk, yeah, that shows that you're caring for yourself. But the difference is psychologically how you are taking care of yourself. And that's when real self-love comes in, because it takes a person that wants to actually do the work and think about doing the work. And so that comes from a place of psychologically, mental, you're thinking on how you take care of yourself. So I really appreciated her saying that. But I do have a course out there, and I'm not selling it off. I'm just saying that reminded me when she said that. So just wanted to.
What beautiful words, Ms. Cook. Oh my goodness. And what a lovely course it sounds like you have developed. Thank you.
Welcome.
All right, I just want to give a round of applause to the panelists and say thank you so much for taking time out of your day to be here and join us and be a part of the full day and training and share your just words of wisdom and years of being with students and hosting them. And we truly appreciate you. Thank you so much.